Hello everyone, I am the narrator and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The headlights of my old Chevy cut through the inky darkness, illuminating an endless ribbon of asphalt stretching towards the horizon. I'd been driving for hours, the monotony of the empty highway lulling me into a trance-like state. The radio had long since faded to static, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the hypnotic hum of tires on pavement. I glanced at the glowing green numbers on my dashboard clock, 2:37 a.m., still a long way to go before I reached my sister's place in Tucson. I'd promised to help her move, but now I was regretting my decision to drive through the night. My eyelids felt heavy and I fumbled for my lukewarm coffee in the cup holder as I took a sip of the bitter liquid. A flicker of movement in my rearview mirror caught my attention. Headlights appeared in the distance behind me, growing larger as they approached. I felt a mixture of relief and unease on one hand. It was comforting to know I wasn't completely alone out here in the middle of nowhere, but something about the way the car was rapidly closing the gap between us sent a shiver down my spine within minutes. The vehicle was right on my bumper. I squinted into the mirror, trying to make out any details, but all I could see was a dark silhouette and the glare of headlights. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I waited for them to pass. The highway was wide open. There was no reason for them to tailgate like this, but they didn't pass. The car matched my speed exactly, staying mere feet from my rear bumper. I tapped my brakes, hoping they'd take the hint and back off. Instead, they seemed to inch even closer. My heart began to race. This wasn't normal behavior. I pressed down on the accelerator, pushing my old car faster. The speedometer crept up 80 miles per hour. The car behind me kept pace. Effortlessly, I white-knuckled the steering wheel, my palms growing sweaty. "What the hell do you want?" I muttered, glancing nervously between the roadhead and my rearview mirror after a few more minutes of this nerve-wracking pursuit. I spotted a sign for an upcoming rest area. My gas tank was still nearly full, but I decided to pull over anyway. Maybe this weirdo would just pass me by if I got off the road. I flicked on my turn signal and began to decelerate, to my surprise and relief. The headlights behind me dimmed as the car slowed down too as I pulled into the rest area and found a parking spot. I watched the other vehicle continue down the highway, quickly disappearing into the darkness. I let out a long exhale, realizing I'd been holding my breath. "Get it together," I told myself. Shaking my head, "You're letting your imagination run wild." The rest area was deserted, just a small building with restrooms and vending machines surrounded by a few picnic tables. I stepped out of my car, stretching my legs and breathing in the cool night air. The silence was absolute. No traffic noise, no insects chirping, not even a breeze rustling the scraggly trees dotting the landscape. I headed for the restroom, fishing some change out of my pocket for the vending machines. As I pushed open the heavy metal door, the fluorescent lights flickered to life. Humming faintly, I winced at my reflection in the grimy mirror, bloodshot eyes and stubble shadowing my jaw. I splashed some cold water on my face, trying to wake myself up when I emerged a few minutes later, clutching a bag of stale chips and a bottle of water. I froze in my tracks there. Parked right next to my Chevy was a car I hadn't noticed before. It was hard to make out many details in the dim lighting, but it looked remarkably similar to the one that had been tailing me. My breath caught in my throat as I approached. Cautiously, the car was empty, its windows tinted too, darkly to see inside clearly. I did a quick scan of the rest area, but there was no sign of the driver. A gust of wind sent a discarded paper bag skittering across the pavement, making me jump. Get a grip, I thought. It's probably just another traveler who pulled in after you. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. I hurried back to my car, fumbling with my keys as I slid into the driver's seat. I caught a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision. My head snapped around, but there was nothing there. Just shadows and stillness. With shaking hands, I started the engine and peeled out of the parking lot. Gravel crunching under my tires. In my rearview mirror, I saw headlights flare to life. The other car was pulling out behind me. No, no, no. I muttered, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. This couldn't be happening. I accelerated hard the engine of my old Chevy Protesting as I pushed it to its limits. The headlight stayed right with me, neither gaining nor losing ground. Miles of empty highway flew by as I tried to put distance between us. My mind raced through possible explanations and options should I try to call for help. My cell phone was dead. I'd forgotten to charge it before leaving. Could I outlast them? Eventually, they'd need to stop for gas, right? Just as I was considering attempting some Evis of maneuvers I'd seen in movies, a new set of headlights appeared on the horizon ahead of me. Relief flooded through me. Another car, a witness, maybe even help. As the approaching vehicle drew closer, I flashed my headlights desperately, trying to signal that something was wrong, but the car didn't slow down. It blazed past me at high speed, and in the brief moment it was alongside me, I caught a glimpse of the driver. The car was empty. I let out a strangled gasp, nearly swerving off the road in shock. That was impossible. I must not have seen correctly in the split second the car PED, but a cold dread settled in the pit of my stomach as I replayed the image in my mind. There had been no one behind the wheel. My eyes darted to the rearview mirror. The car that had been following me was still there, keeping pace, but now it was joined by the car that had passed me. Both sets of headlights glared in my mirror, perfectly aligned. I was trapped between them. Panic clawed at my throat. This couldn't be real. I was hallucinating. I had to be the lack of sleep, the stress of the long drive. It was all catching up to me. I shook my head violently, trying to clear it. When I looked back at the road, my blood ran cold ahead of me. More headlights were appearing first, just a few pairs, then dozens, all speeding towards me as they drew closer. I could see that every single vehicle was empty. Driver's seats vacant, yet moving with precision. I was surrounded on all sides by a convoy of ghost cars. My breath came in ragged gasps as I searched desperately for an escape route, but the phantom vehicles had formed an impenetrable wall around me. No matter which way I swerved, they moved to block my path. Suddenly, all of the cars began to slow down in unison. I found my own speed dropping as if my car was being controlled by an unseen force. We came to a stop in the middle of the highway, my vehicle at the center of a circle of silent driverless cars. For a long moment, nothing happened. The only sound was my own panicked breathing and the ticking of my engine. As it cooled, then one by one, the doors of the surrounding cars began to open. Dark figures emerged from each vehicle, humanoid shapes but wrong. Somehow they moved with an unnatural fluidity, gliding rather than walking. As they drew closer, I could see that their bodies seemed to be made of swirling shadows, constantly shifting and reforming. I scrambled to lock my doors, but my trembling fingers couldn't seem to find the button. One of the shadow figures reached my car and placed a hand on the window. Where it touched, frost spread across the glass in intricate patterns. The temperature inside my car plummeted. My breath fogged in front of me as I shrank back against the seat, as far from the window as I could get. The shadow being leaned in close, its featureless face inches from mine, separated only by the thin barrier of glass, and then impossibly, it began to push through the glass, rippled like water as the figure's head and shoulders emerged into my car. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The shadow creature reached for me with hands made of darkness. Just as its cold fingers brushed my skin, a blaring horn jolted me awake. I sat bolt upright, heart pounding. I was in my car, pulled over on the shoulder of the highway. Sunlight streamed through the windows and a semi roared past the driver, giving me an irritated look. It took me several minutes to get my bearings. I must have pulled over at some point during the night, too tired to continue the terrifying journey. Had all been a dream. I scrubbed my hands over my face, trying to shake off the lingering dread from the nightmare. As my breathing slowly returned to normal, I reached for the key to restart my car. My hand froze there on the passenger seat. Next to me was a single black feather. As I watched, it crumbled to ash and blew away on a phantom breeze. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty seat and trying to convince myself that I was truly awake. Eventually, I put the car in drive and pulled back onto the highway. But I couldn't shake the feeling that just beyond my peripheral vision, shadows were moving, and somewhere in my rearview mirror, phantom headlights were gaining ground. The scream that echoed across our farm that night wasn't human. It wasn't animal either. It was something in between. A sound that made my blood run cold and my hair stand on end. I'd heard all manner of noises growing up on this land. The low bellow of cattle, the shrill cries of hawks, even the occasional mountain lion screech, but this was different, and it was coming from the old silo. I'm Jim Hawkins, third-generation owner of Hawkins Family Farm. We're not a big operation, just a modest spread of cornfields and cattle pastures nestled in the rolling hills of rural Ohio. The farm's been in my family for nearly a century, passed down from my grandfather to my father and now to me. I know every inch of this land like the back of my hand, or at least I thought I did, the night everything changed. Started like any other. I'd finished my evening chores, fed the livestock, and was looking forward to a cold beer and some mindless TV before bed. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hue of orange and purple. A warm breeze rustled through the cornfields, carrying the earthy scent of late summer. I was halfway to the house when I heard it, that bone-chilling cry piercing the twilight. I froze, my work boots rooted to the dusty path. For a moment I thought I must have imagined it, then it came again, louder, this time unmistakable. My first instinct was to run, either away from the sound or towards the house to call for help, but something held me in place. Curiosity, stubbornness, or maybe just the ingrained responsibility of being the man of the farm, whatever it was, I found myself turning towards the old silo instead of away from it. The silo loomed against the darkening sky, a hulking cylinder of corroded metal that hadn't been used in years. It was the oldest structure on the property, built by my grandfather in the 1930s. We'd switched to more modern grain storage decades ago, and the silo had stood empty ever since. A silent sentinel at the edge of the cornfields. As I approached, my footsteps crunching on gravel, an eerie silence fell over the farm. No crickets chirping, no distant loud of cattle, just the sound of my own ragged breathing and the thudding of my heart in my ears. The silo's rusted doors stood slightly ajar, creaking softly in the breeze. I hesitated, suddenly aware of how foolish this was. I had no weapon, no flashlight, nothing but my own two hands, and a stubborn need to know what was going on in my own backyard. I pushed the door open wider, wincing at the screech of metal on metal. The interior was pitch black. The fading twilight, unable to penetrate the silo's depths, I fumbled in my pocket for my phone, cursing under my breath when I realized I'd left it charging in the house. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing in the empty space. "Is anyone in here?" Silence. I took a tentative step inside, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness. The air was thick with the musty smell of old grain and something else, something sharp and acrid that made my nose wrinkle. As my vision slowly cleared, I began to make out shapes in the gloom. The concrete floor was littered with debris, old pieces of Eachin machinery, empty feed bags, rusted tools. But something else caught my eye, something that didn't belong. Scratches, deep, jagged grooves carved into the metal walls of the silo. They started near the floor and ran upwards, some as high as I could see in the dim light. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. What could have made marks like that, and why? I ran my hand over one of the scratches, feeling the roughness under my calloused fingers. Whatever had done this had been powerful and desperate. A sound from above made me jerk my hand back. It was faint, barely audible, a scraping noise like something moving against metal. I tilted my head back, and at the top was that a flicker of movement before I could talk myself out of it. I was climbing the rungs, were cold under my hands, flakes of rust coming off on my palms. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to run from this place and never look back. But something drove me upward, a need to know that overpowered my fear. I was about halfway up when I heard the noise. Again, Again, that inhuman cry that had first drawn me here. It was louder now, coming from directly above me. I froze, clinging to the ladder, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. For a long moment I stayed there, paralyzed, between fear and curiosity. Then slowly I began to climb again, one rung at a time, my breathing ragged in the stillness of the silo. As I neared the top, a new sound reached my ears, a low rhythmic thumping, like something heavy being dragged across metal. It was coming from the very top of the silo, just out of sight. I reached the final rung, my arms trembling with exertion and fear. Taking a deep breath, I poked my head up through the opening at the top of the ladder. What I saw there will haunt me for the rest of my days. The top of the silo was bathed in pale moonlight, streaming through the open roof hatch. And there in the center of the circular space was something. It was vaguely humanoid in shape, but larger, much larger. Its skin was a mottled gray, hanging in loose folds over a skeletal frame. Long, spindly limbs ended in claws that scraped against the metal floor with each movement, creating the dragging sound I'd heard. But it was the creature's face that made my blood run cold. Where I should have been, there were only dark, empty sockets. Its mouth was a gaping moth, filled with rows of needle-sharp teeth opened wide in a silent scream. For a moment we stared at each other, me frozen in horror, and the creature, its eyeless gaze somehow fixed directly on me. Then it moved, faster than anything that size should be able to move, lunging towards me with impossible speed. I reacted it on pure instinct, releasing my grip on the ladder and letting myself fall. The world spun around me as I plummeted through darkness. I hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me. Pain shot through my body, but adrenaline pushed me to my feet. I stumbled towards the silo door, my vision blurry, ears ringing. Behind me I could hear the creature descending, its claws screeching against metal as it climbed down the ladder with inhuman agility. I burst out of the silo, gasping in the cool night air. Without looking back, I ran. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life across the fields toward the safety of the farmhouse. The trance to sound of pursuit faded behind me, but I didn't slow down until I'd slammed and locked the door behind me. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my bedroom, every light in the house blazing, a loaded shotgun across my lap. As the first rays of dawn crept through the windows, I finally early morning light, no sign of the horror I'd encountered. Part of me wanted to believe it had all been a nightmare, a hallucination brought on by stress and exhaustion, but I knew better. I called the sheriff that morning, trying to explain what I'd seen without sounding like a complete lunatic. To his credit, he listened patiently, then promised to send a deputy out to take a look around. They found nothing, of course. No creature, no scratches on the silo walls. The deputy gave me a look that was equal parts pity and suspicion, clearly thinking I was either crazy or pulling some kind of prank. But I know what I saw. I know what's out there, hiding in the darkness of that old silo. And every night since, as the sun dips below the horizon, I find myself staring out at that rusted cylinder, watching for any sign of movement, because deep down, I know the truth. Whatever that thing was, it's still out there, waiting, and someday it will be back. The farm's been in my family for generations. This land is in my blood, but now, for the first time in my life, I'm thinking of selling, of packing up and leaving this place behind, because some things, once seen, can't be unseen, and some horrors, once awakened, can never truly be put back to sleep. The moment I saw those blood-stained hands, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake, but by then, it was already too late. The sun was setting, my phone was dead, and I was stranded on a lonely stretch of road with a stranger whose smile didn't quite reach his eyes. It had all started so innocently, just another long drive on my cross-country road trip, the kind of journey I dreamed about since I was a kid. Me, my beat-up Honda Civic, and the open road, freedom, adventure, and the promise of new horizons. I'm Sarah, 28 years old, and finally taking that gap year I never got around to after college. 5 years of grinding away in a cubicle had left me feeling hollow, unfulfilled. So I'd quit my job, sold most of my stuff, and hit the road. No real destination in mind, just a vague plan to head west and see where the wind took me. For the first few weeks, it had been everything I'd hoped for. Stunning vistas, quirky roadside attractions, late nights around campfires with fellow travelers. I'd felt more alive than I had in years. But as I pushed deeper into the heartland, the romance of the road started to wear thin. Long stretches of monotonous highway, endless fields of corn and wheat. The novelty of gas station coffee and greasy diner food had long since faded. So when my car started making an ominous rattling noise somewhere in the middle of Nebraska, my heart sank. I'm no mechanic. Horizon, I spotted a faded sign for a town called Millbrook, population 362. It wasn't much, but it was my best hope for finding a mechanic before nightfall. I never made it to Millbrook. About 5 miles outside of town, my car gave a final sputtering gasp and died. I coasted to the shoulder, a plume of smoke rising from under the hood. Cursing under my breath, I got out to survey the damage. The acrid smell of burning oil hit me as soon as I popped the hood. Even to my untrained eye, it was clear this was beyond a quick roadside fix. I reached for my phone, only to find the battery completely drained. In my haste to get on the road that morning, I'd forgotten to plug it in. Panic started to set in. As I looked around, nothing but empty fields and darkening sky in every direction. The last car I'd seen had passed by over an hour ago. I was well and truly stranded. Just as I was contemplating whether to start walking towards town or hunker down in my car for the night, I heard the rumble of an engine in the distance. Relief flooded through me as I saw headlights approaching the vehicle. An old pickup truck that had seen better days slowed as it neared. The driver, a man who looked to be in his mid-40s, leaned out the window. "Car trouble?" he called out, his voice friendly enough. I nodded, trying not to look as desperate as I felt. "Yeah, I think it's the engine. Any chance you know of a mechanic in town?" He smiled, and something about it made me uneasy. It didn't quite reach his eyes, which remained cold and assessing. "Well, you're in luck," he said. "I do a bit of mechanical work myself. Why don't I take a look?" Before I could respond, he was already out of his truck and heading towards my car. I watched as he peered under the hood, making thoughtful noises. "Oh yeah, I see the problem," he said after a minute. "Looks like your timing belt snapped, took out a good chunk of your engine with it. I'm afraid." My heart sank. This was going to be expensive, I could tell. Any chance of a quick fix to get me to town? I asked, though I already knew the answer. He shook his head. "No, I'm afraid this old girl isn't going anywhere under her own power. But tell you what, I can give you a tow into my shop in Millbrook. We can sort it out there." I hesitated. Every instinct was screaming at me not to get in a car with this stranger. But what choice did I have? It would be dark soon, and I couldn't very well spend the night out here. "That's really kind of you," I said, trying to sound grateful rather than apprehensive. "I really appreciate it." He waved off my thanks. "No trouble at all. Always happy to help a traveler in need. Name's John, by the way." "Sarah," I replied, shaking his offered hand. That's when I noticed it. As our palms met, I caught a glimpse of something dark caked under his fingernails and in the creases of his knuckles. At first I thought it was grease or oil. He was a mechanic after all. But as he pulled his hand away, I realized with a jolt of horror that it was blood. My mind raced. There could be innocent explanations. Right? Maybe he'd cut himself working on a car earlier. Maybe he was a hunter and had been field dressing his kill. But the way his eyes glittered as he watched my reaction told me this was something far more sinister. I forced a smile, trying to act as if I hadn't noticed anything. Miss? So, shall we get started on that tow? J.N. nodded, turning back to his truck to fetch a tow cable. As soon as his back was turned, I made a split-second decision. I had to run. But before I could take more than a couple of steps, I felt a hand clamp down on my shoulder. J.N.'s voice was low and dangerous in my ear. Now, Sarah. Let's not do anything foolish. I felt something sharp press against my side. A knife, I realized with growing terror. Get in the truck, J.N. said, his friendly demeanor gone. And don't try anything stupid. With the knife at my back, I had no choice but to comply. As we pulled away, leaving my car behind, I watched the last traces of sunlight disappear from the horizon. The darkness that fell seemed to mirror the despair settling over me. We drove in silence for what felt like hours, though it couldn't have been more than 20 minutes. The knife remained pressed against my side, a constant reminder of the danger I was in. Finally, J.N. turned off the main road onto a rutted dirt track. We bumped along for another few minutes before a dilapidated farmhouse came into view. My heart sank. This was no mechanic's shop. Home, sweet home, J.N. said, his voice dripping with mockery as we got out of the truck. I tried one last desperate plea. Please, I said, hating the tremor in my voice. You don't have to do this, just let me go, and I swear I won't tell anyone. J.N.'s laugh was cold and humorless. Oh, Sarah, don't you know, no one ever leaves Millbrook. He marched me towards the house, the knife now openly visible in his blood-stained hand. As we neared the porch, I heard something that made my blood run cold. The sound of muffled screams coming from inside. In that moment, I knew I had to act. It was now or never. Summoning every ounce of strength and courage I possessed, I drove my elbow back into J.N.'s solar plexus. He let out a grunt of pain and surprise, his grip on me loosening just enough. I bolted. Running blindly into the darkness, I could hear J.N. cursing behind me, his heavy footsteps in pursuit. But fear and adrenaline lent me speed I never knew I had. I ran until my lungs burned, and my legs felt like jelly when I finally... Eyes widening at my wild appearance and frantic story. She drove me straight to the sheriff's office in the next town over. The investigation that followed uncovered horrors beyond my worst nightmares. John wasn't just a killer. He was part of something larger. Something that had been preying on unlucky travelers for years. They found my car, of course. The engine was fine. John had merely disconnected the battery to strand me there. A simple trick that had nearly cost me everything. It's been 6 months since that night, and I'm back home now. My dreams of carefree adventure have been replaced by nightmares of blood-stained hands and lonely roads, but I'm alive. I survived. Sometimes, late at night, I find myself thinking about those other victims, the ones who weren't as lucky as me, the ones whose screams I heard in that farmhouse. And I wonder how many others are out there waiting for help that may never come. So I tell my story again and again to anyone who will listen, because maybe, just maybe, it will save someone else from making the same mistakes I did, from trusting too easily, from ignoring their instincts. Because out there, on the open road, freedom and danger often walk hand in hand, and sometimes the real monsters aren't hiding under your bed. They're waiting by the side of the road, ready to offer you a helping hand. The first time I noticed something was amiss was when I found a single long black hair on my pillow.
It wouldn't have been strange, except I'm blonde and I was traveling alone. That's when I realized the nightmare had already begun.
Right here in the middle of paradise.
My name is Emma, and this was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime. A 2-week Caribbean cruise to celebrate my 30th birthday and my recent promotion. I'd saved for months, splurging on a balcony cabin with ocean views. The brochure had promised sun-drenched days, star-filled nights, and memories to last a lifetime. What it didn't mention was the terror that would keep me awake at night, wondering if I'd make it off this floating city alive. The cruise started off perfectly. I boarded the massive ship, the SS Oceanic Dream, with a sense of awe and excitement. My cabin was everything I'd hoped for. Spacious, with a private balcony overlooking the sparkling Caribbean. I spent that first day exploring the ship, marveling at the multiple pools, the lavish restaurants, the bustling casino. It felt like I'd stepped into another world, one where my everyday worries couldn't touch me. That evening, I met my cabin neighbor, a friend, older woman named Margaret. She was a cruise veteran, regaling me with stories of her past voyages. We made plans, meet for breakfast the next morning. But Margaret never showed up for breakfast, or lunch, or dinner. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was a big ship after all, with plenty to do. Maybe she'd made other friends, or was sleeping off a late night at the casino. But as the days went by and I still hadn't seen her, a nagging worry began to grow in the pit of my stomach on the same.
The third day, I decided to ask the cabin steward if he'd seen Margaret. His response sent a chill down my spine. "I'm sorry, miss," he said, looking confused, "but there's no one registered in the cabin next to yours. It's been empty this whole voyage." I insisted that he was mistaken, that I'd met Margaret, talked to her, but he just shook his head, a look of concern crossing his face. I could see him wondering if the sun and sea air had gotten to me. That night, I lay awake in my cabin, listening intently for any sound from next door. The walls on these ships were thin. I should have been able to hear something, but there was nothing but silence. Unable to sleep, I stepped out onto my balcony, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. That's when I saw it, a flicker of movement in the cabin next door, a shadow passing behind the curtains. Someone was in there. My heart racing, I rushed to my cabin door, determined to knock on Margaret's door and get to the bottom of this. But as I reached for the handle, I froze. There, stuck to the outside of my door, was a Polaroid photo. It showed me sleeping in my bed, taken from inside my cabin. Panic seized me. Someone had been in my room while I slept. Someone was watching me. With trembling hands, I locked and bolted my door, then wedged a chair under the handle for good measure. I spent the rest of the night huddled in the corner of my cabin, jumping at every creak and groan of the ship. When morning finally came, I went straight to ship security. I showed them the photo, told them about Margaret, begged them to investigate. But the head of security, a stern-faced man named Johnson, seemed more annoyed than concerned. "Man, we take the safety of our passengers very seriously," he said in a tone that suggested the opposite. "But we've checked the logs. The cabin next to yours is unoccupied. There is no passenger named Margaret on this cruise. As for the photo, well, are you sure you didn't take it yourself? Maybe as a joke?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They thought I was making this up, or worse, that I was crazy. Frustrated and scared, I decided to do some investigating of my own. I started paying closer attention to my surroundings, watching for anything out of the ordinary. And slowly, I began to notice things, small things at first, easily overlooked, like how certain crew members would exchange meaningful glances when they thought no one was looking, or how there always seemed to be someone lingering near my cabin, no matter the time of day. Then there were the disappearances. Not just Margaret, other passengers I'd met and chatted with would suddenly vanish with no explanation. When I asked about them, I was met with blank stares or insistence that no such person had ever been on board. One night, unable to sleep, I decided to take a walk around the ship. The decks were eerily quiet, most passengers long since retired to their cabins. As I rounded a corner, I saw a serious expression sent a shiver down my spine as I turned to leave, my foot scuffed against the deck. The sound echoed in the quiet night, and the crew members' heads snapped up in unison. The look in their eyes as they spotted me, it wasn't surprise or embarrassment at being overheard. It was hunger. I ran behind me. I could hear footsteps gaining on me quickly. I didn't dare look back, just focused on putting one foot in front of the other, my lungs burning as I gasped for air. I made it back to my cabin and locked myself in, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. As my panic subsided, I tried to make sense of what had happened. Was I losing my mind, or was something sinister really going on? The next day I decided to try one last time to get help. I approached a group of passengers lounging by the pool, determined to make them understand the danger we were all in. But as I began to speak, I saw their eyes glaze over. Their smiles became fixed, artificial. And then in perfect unison, they all stood up and walked away, leaving me standing alone by the empty pool. That's when I knew whatever was happening on this ship, it wasn't just a few crew members. It was everyone, or at least almost everyone. I spent the next few days in a state of constant vigilance, barely sleeping, jumping at every sound. I stopped eating at the ship's restaurants, subsisting on snacks I'd brought from home. I trust no one. And then, 3 days before we were due to dock, I made a terrifying discovery. I was in my cabin, frantically searching for my passport. I decided I needed to be ready to run as soon as we reached port. As I rifled through my suitcase, my hand brushed against something hard and cold. It was a small metal object. As I pulled it out, my blood ran cold. It was a set of surgical tools crusted with what looked horribly like dried blood. I didn't put those there. I would never. But then a flash of memory. The first night on the ship. The welcome cocktail that had tasted a bit off. The strange, dreamlike state I'd been in afterwards. What had I done? As I sat there staring at the damning evidence in my hands, a knock came at my cabin door. "Housekeeping," a cheery voice called out. I didn't answer. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. "Miss Emma, we know you're in there. It's time for your treatment." Treatment? What treatment? I never signed up for any treatment. The door handle jiggled once, twice. Then I heard the unmistakable sound of a key card sliding into the lock. In that moment, survival instinct took over. I grabbed my emergency bag, the one I'd packed days ago when I first suspected something was wrong, and ran for the balcony as the cabin door swung open. Behind me, I did the only thing I could think of. I jumped. The shock of the cold water jolted me back to reality. I surfaced, gasping for air, and looked up at the towering hull of the ship. I could see figures on my balcony pointing down at me. I had no idea how far I was from land, or if I could even make it, but I knew one thing for certain. Whatever fate awaited me in these waters, it couldn't be worse than what I was leaving behind. As I swam, the ship's lights grew dimmer. The last thing I heard before the waves swallowed all sound was a voice over the ship's PA system.
Attention passengers, we seem to have lost one of our own. But don't worry, on the SS Oceanic Dream, no one has ever truly lost. Sleep tight and sweet dreams.
I don't know how long I swam. Hours, maybe days. My muscles screamed, my lungs burned. But finally, miraculously, I saw lights on the horizon, a coast safety as I dragged myself onto the beach. I knew my ordeal wasn't over. Who would believe my story? A ship full of people involved in what, some kind of cult? A massive conspiracy? Even I wasn't sure I believed it. But I knew what I'd seen, what I'd experienced. And I knew I had to warn others, so I'm telling my story now to anyone who will listen. Because somewhere out there, the SS Oceanic Dream is still sailing, still claiming passengers, and not everyone will be as lucky as I was. If you're planning a cruise, do me a favor. Double-check your itinerary. And if you see a ship called the Oceanic Dream, run. Run as fast as you can. Because on that ship, the nightmare is all too real. The first time we saw the symbols carved into the trees, we laughed it off as some hiker's idea of a joke. By the time we realized the truth, we were already lost in a maze of ancient pines with something watching us from the shadows, something that didn't want us to leave. My name's Alex, and I've been an avid hiker for most of my 28 years. I thought I'd seen it all: treacherous mountain paths, unexpected wildlife encounters, even the occasional rescue mission for less experienced trekkers. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened in the depths of a Blackwood National Forest. It was supposed to be a routine weekend trip. My best friend Jake and I had been planning this hike for months, poring over maps and trail guides, eager to explore one of the most remote areas of the forest. We'd both grown up near Blackwood, but this particular region had always been off limits, too dangerous, too easy to get lost in, the rangers said. But we were experienced, confident, maybe a little too confident, as it turned out. We set out early on a crisp Saturday morning, the air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. The first few hours were everything we'd hoped for: challenging terrain, breathtaking views, and a sense of true wilderness that's hard to find these days. It was around midday when things started to feel off. "Hey, Alex," Jake called out, his voice tinged with confusion. "I come. Check this out." I backtracked a few steps to where he was standing, staring at a massive old-growth pine. At first I didn't see what had caught his attention. Then my eyes focused on a series of symbols carved deep into the bark. They weren't like any trail markers I'd ever seen. Intricate spirals and angular lines formed patterns that seemed to shift the longer I looked at them.
It was unsettling, to say the least. "Weird," I muttered, running my fingers over the grooves. They felt older than they looked, the edges worn smooth by time. Probably just some bored kids playing around.
Jake nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes.
"Yeah, probably. Let's keep moving."
We pushed on, trying to shake off the strange feeling those symbols had left us with. But as the afternoon wore on, we started noticing more of them. Every few hundred yards, we'd spot another tree marked with those bizarre carvings. And something else was bothering me, though.
I couldn't quite put my finger on it.
It wasn't until Jake mentioned it that I realized what was wrong, Alex.
He said, his voice low and tense.
"Have you heard any birds lately or anything?" I stopped in my tracks, listening intently. He was right. Their forest had gone completely silent. No bird song, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Nothing but the sound of our own breathing and the crunch of leaves under our boots. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cooling air.
"Maybe we should turn back," I suggested,
trying to keep the growing unease out of my voice.
"We can always try this trail another day."
Jake nodded eagerly, clearly as unsettled as I was. We consulted our map and GPS, plotting the quickest route back to the trailhead. But as we started to retrace our steps, nothing looked familiar. The trees seemed to press in closer, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. Shadows deepened despite it being early afternoon. And those symbols, they were everywhere now, carved into nearly every tree we passed. After an hour of increasingly panicked hiking, we had to face the truth. We were lost.
"This is impossible,"
Jake muttered, frantically checking his GPS.
"We should have hit the main trail by now. It's like the whole forest has changed."
I was about to respond when a twig snapped somewhere behind us. We both whirled around, hearts pounding.
"Hello?"
I called out, my voice sounding small and scared in the oppressive silence.
"Is someone there?"
No response, but I could have sworn I saw movement in the shadows between the trees. A flicker of something that didn't move like any animal I'd ever seen.
"We need to get out of here,"
Jake whispered, his face pale now.
We picked a direction and started walking, trying to move as quietly as possible while still covering ground quickly.
The feeling of being watched was overwhelming now. Every few minutes I'd catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye, only to find nothing there. When I turned to look as the light began to fade, panic set in. We were not equipped for a night in the forest, especially not whatever this place had become. Our flashlights cast eerie shadows as we pushed on, jumping at every rustle and crack in the darkness. That's when we heard it. A sound that I still hear in my nightmares. It started as a low hum, almost below the English threshold of hearing, but it grew louder, resolving into something that was almost like words, almost, but not quite. It was as if the forest itself was trying to speak. Jake grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in painfully. "Tell me, you hear that?" he said, his voice shaking. I nodded, too terrified to speak. The not quite words seemed to be coming from all around us now, rising and falling in a rhythm that made my head spin, and then, cutting through the otherworldly sound, came a scream. A human scream, filled with terror and pain. It came from somewhere ahead of us, deeper in the forest. We stood frozen, caught between the instinct to run and the ingrained need to help someone in trouble. We have to check it out," I said finally, hating myself even as the words left my mouth. "What if someone's hurt?" Jake looked like he wanted to argue, but nodded grimly. We moved forward slowly, every step feeling like we were walking deeper into a trap. The screaming had stopped, replaced by a heavy, anticipatory silence. We came to a small clearing, our flashlights illuminating a scene that defied explanation. In the center of the clearing stood a massive, ancient tree. Its trunk was wider than any I'd ever seen, twisted and gnarled with age, and carved into every inch of its bark were those symbols, more intricate and alien than ever. But it was what was at the base of the tree that turned my blood to ice. A collection of objects that had no business being this deep in the wilderness. Watches, phones, wallets, dozens of them, arranged in a careful circle around the tree. Personal belongings from other hikers, other people who had wandered into this part of the forest and never made it out. "We need to go," Jake whispered, tugging at my sleeve. "Now, Alex, we need to go, right now." I nodded, unable to tear my eyes away from the grisly display. As we turned to leave, my flashlight beam caught something moving at the edge of the clearing. A figure, tall and impossibly thin, stepped out from behind a tree. It looked almost human, but wrong. Its limbs were too long, its movements too fluid, and its face, where its face should have been, was nothing but smooth, blank skin. A scream caught in my throat as more figures emerged from the darkness. 3, 5, a dozen of them, all with that same blank, featureless face. They began to move towards us with an unnatural grace. They, not quite words, growing louder. We ran. Branches whipped at our faces as we tore through the underbrush, blind panic driving us forward. I could hear them behind us, moving through the forest with inhuman speed. The symbols on the trees seemed to glow in the darkness, pulsing in time with the alien chant that filled the air. I don't know how long we ran. It could have been minutes or hours. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that nightmare forest. But suddenly, watching us from between the trees. Then they were gone, and it was just a normal forest again. We drove straight to the ranger station, babbling our story to increasingly skeptical-looking officers. They searched the area we described, but found nothing out of the ordinary. No symbols, no clearing, no evidence that anything strange had happened at all. Part of me wanted to believe we'd imagined it all, some sort of shared hallucination brought on by exhaustion and dehydration. But I know what I saw, what I felt. It's been 6 months since that day, and I haven't set foot in any forest since. Jake's the same way. We don't talk about what happened, but I can see the lingering fear in his eyes. The same fear I feel. Every time I look at the trees lining my suburban street and wonder what might be hiding behind them. I'm telling this story now as a warning. If you ever find yourself in Blackwood National Forest, or any wilderness really, and you start to notice strange symbols carved into the trees, don't dismiss them. Don't laugh them off like we did. Turn around. Get out while you still can. Because there are things in this world that defy explanation, things that live in the deep, dark places of the forest, things that are always watching, always waiting for unneary travelers to wander just a little too far off the beaten path. And if you hear whispers in the woods that sound almost, but not quite, like words, run, run, and don't look back. Because in some forests, getting lost is the least of your worries. The scratching started on the second night. At first, I convinced myself it was just a raccoon or a curious bear. But when I unzipped the tent and came face to face with those glowing, inhuman eyes, I realized our family camping trip had become a fight for survival. I'm Mark, a 35-year-old software engineer from the suburbs of Seattle. My wife Sarah and I had decided it was time to introduce our kids, 10-year-old Emma and 8-year-old Ethan, to the great outdoors. We'd both grown up camping and wanted to share that experience with them, so we packed up our minivan with a tent, sleeping bags, and enough supplies for a long weekend in the Mount Baker Snowy National Forest. The first day was picture perfect. We found a secluded campsite near a babbling brook, set up our tent, and spent the afternoon hiking and identifying plants. Emma proved to be a natural, eagerly pointing out different types of trees and flowers. Ethan was more interested in skipping stones across the stream, but he seemed to be enjoying himself too. As night fell, we gathered around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and telling stories. The kids were enthralled by the star-filled sky, so different from what they could see back home. Sarah and I exchanged satisfied smiles. This was exactly what we'd hoped for. We all turned in early, tired from the day's activities. The sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl lulled. The morning it was faint, at first barely audible over the nighttime forest sounds, but it was persistent, rhythmic. Scratch, scratch, pause, scratch, scratch, pause. I lay there for a while, listening. It seemed to be coming from the side of the tent. Probably just a curious animal, I told myself. Nothing to worry about. But as the minutes ticked by, the scratching grew louder, more insistent. I could feel Sarah stirring beside me. "Mark," she whispered, "do you hear that?" I nodded, then realized she couldn't see me in the darkness. "Yeah," I whispered back. "Probably just a raccoon. I'll check it out." I fumbled for the flashlight we'd left by our sleeping bag and slowly unzipped the tent flap. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the surrounding trees. Nothing seemed out of place. The scratching had stopped as soon as I moved. I was about to zip the tent back up when I saw it. A flicker of movement just at the edge of the flashlight's beam. I swung the light in that direction, my heart suddenly pounding. For a split second, I caught a glimpse of eyes reflecting the light, but they were too high off the ground to be a raccoon, too large to be a deer, and the glow, it wasn't the normal reflection you'd see in an animal's eyes. It was an eerie, almost phosphorescent green. Then it was gone, leaving me to wonder if I had imagined it. I quickly zipped the tent back up and tried to reassure Sarah. "Didn't see anything," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Probably just ran off when it heard me." She didn't seem entirely convinced, but we both eventually drifted back to sleep. The rest of the night passed without incident. The next day, I found myself constantly scanning the tree line looking for what, I wasn't sure. The kids, oblivious to the night's disturbance, were having a blast. We spent the morning fishing in the stream, then went for another hike in the afternoon. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. More than once, I thought I saw something moving just out of the corner of my eye. When I turned to look, there was never anything there. Sarah noticed my unease. "Everything okay?" she asked, as we were preparing dinner. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just a bit tired, I guess. didn't sleep great last night." She gave me a look that said she didn't quite believe me, but didn't press the issue. That night, as we sat around the campfire, Emma suddenly pointed into the darkness. "Dad, what's that?" I followed her gaze, my blood running cold. There, just beyond the circle of firelight, was a pair of glowing green eyes, the same ones I'd seen the night before. "Everyone in the tent now?" I said, trying to keep my voice calm, but "Dad?" Ethan started to protest. "Now," I repeated more firmly. This time, as Sarah ushered the kids into the tent, I grabbed a burning branch from the fire, holding it out in front of me like a weapon. The eyes had disappeared, but I could hear movement in the underbrush, something circling our campsite. I backed slowly towards the tent, my eyes darting from shadow to shadow. Just as I reached the tent flap, I heard a low, rumbling growl. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. Not quite animal, not quite human. It raised the hair on the back of my neck. I practically dove into the tent, zipping it up securely behind me. Sarah looked at me, her eyes wide with fear. The kids, picking up on our anxiety, huddled close. "What's going on, Dad?" Emma whispered. I took a deep breath, trying to figure out how to explain without terrifying them further. "There's something out there," I said finally. "Probably just a curious bear, but we need to stay in the tent, okay?" Ethan's lower lip trembled. "I'm scared." Sarah pulled him close. "It's okay, sweetie. We're safe in here." But even as she said it, the scratching started again, louder this time, more purposeful. It moved around the tent as if whatever was out there was testing for weaknesses. We huddled together in the center of the tent, listening to the scratching and that occasional bone-chilling growl. The kids whimpered softly, and I could feel Sarah trembling beside me. Suddenly, a shadow fell across the tent wall. Something large was right outside. We could hear it breathing, heavy, ragged breaths that didn't sound like any animal I knew. Then a new sound, sniffing, long, deep inhalations. It was smelling us. The shadow moved, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought it was going to tear right through the tent fabric, but instead, it let out another low growl and moved away. We stayed frozen in place, barely daring to breathe. Minutes ticked by, feeling like hours. Gradually, the normal sounds of the forest returned, the rustle of leaves, the hoot of an owl. When dawn finally broke, I cautiously unzipped the tent and peered out. The campsite looked normal in the early morning light, but as I stepped out, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Tracks. Large, deep impressions in the soft earth around our tent, but they weren't bear tracks or any other animal I recognized. They were almost like human footprints, but larger, with long curved claw marks at the end of each toe. And there, stuck to one of the tent poles, was a clump of coarse, dark hair. "We're leaving," I announced, my voice shaking slightly now. We packed up in record time, the kids unusually quiet and compliant as we drove away. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something, emerged from the trees. We never went back to that campsite. Never went camping again, actually. The kids were disappointed at first, but as they got older, and we finally told them the full story of what had happened that night, they understood. I've spent countless hours since then researching, trying to find an explanation for what we encountered. I've read about Bigfoot sightings, wendigos, skinwalkers. Nothing quite fits. All I know is that there are things out there in the wilderness that defy explanation. Things that remind us that for all our technology and civilization, we're not at the top of the food chain everywhere. So if you're planning a camping trip, especially in the Pacific Northwest, be careful, be aware. And if you hear scratching outside your tent in the middle of the night, if you see glowing green eyes in the darkness, don't convince yourself it's just your imagination, because sometimes monsters are real, and they're hungry. The first time I heard the voice on the CB radio, I thought it was just another stranded motorist. By the time I realized the truth, I was already deep in a nightmare I couldn't escape. They say the long-haul trucking life can drive you crazy, but I never expected it to nearly drive me to my death. My name's Jake, and I've been a trucker for the better part of 2 decades. I've crossed this country more times than I can count, hauling everything from fresh produce to auto parts. I've seen my share of weird stuff out on the road, ghost trucks, unexplained lights in the sky, even what I swear was a honest-to-God UFO once. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what happened that night in the back country of Montana. It was a run like any other. I was hauling a load of electronics from Seattle to Chicago, taking the northern route through Idaho and Montana. It was late October and winter was coming on fast in the mountains. The forecast had warned of an early snowstorm, but I figured I could beat it if I pushed through the night. I'd just crossed the Idaho-Montana border when the snow started. At first it was just a few flakes, nothing to worry about, but within an hour it had turned into a full-blown blizzard. The world outside my windshield was a swirling mass of white, my headlights barely penetrating the gloom. I was considering pulling over to wait it out when I heard it. A crackle of static on my CB radio, then a voice cutting through the white noise. "Hello, can anyone hear me? I need help." The voice was female, young-sounding and terrified. I'd heard my share of distress calls over the years, but something about this one sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the storm outside. I keyed the mic. "This is Big Jake. What's your situation?" "Oh, thank God," the voice replied, relief palpable in her tone. "My car broke down. I'm stranded out here in the storm. I don't know where I am exactly, but I passed a sign for Route 87 a while back." Route 87? That was the road I was on, though I couldn't remember seeing any turnoff recently where a car might have gotten stuck. "All right, stay calm," I said. "I'm on 87 now. Can you see the highway from where you are?" I think so," she said, her voice quite down. Wavering, "There's a lot of trees, but I can see lights sometimes through the snow. Please, you have to help me. I'm so cold." Every instinct, honed by years on the road, was screaming at me that something was right, but I couldn't just ignore someone in trouble. That's not who I am. "Okay, I'm going to try to find you," I said. "Keep talking to me. What's your name?" "Sarah," she replied. "My name's Sarah. Please hurry." I slowed my rig, peering out into the storm for any sign of a stranded vehicle. The wind howled around me, rocking the truck. Visibility was down to almost nothing. "Sarah, I need you to help me find you," I said. "Do you see my headlights? Can you hear my engine?" There was a pause, longer than I liked. Then I think I see something." "Yes, I see lights. You're getting closer." But I couldn't see anything ahead except swirling snow and the vague shapes of trees. "Are you sure?" I asked. "I don't see any sign of a car. Please." Sarah's voice took on an urgent, almost frantic tone. "You're so close. Just a little further. Turn right, up ahead." I frowned. There was no right turn up ahead, at least not on any map I knew, just miles of unbroken forest. "Sarah, there's no turn here. Are you sure about where you are?" Another pause. This one stretched on so long I thought we'd lost the connection. Then Sarah's voice came back, but it was different, lower, almost growling. "Turn right, Jake. Turn right now." A chill that had nothing to do with the storm ran down my spine. I eased off the accelerator, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Who is this?" I demanded. "What's going on here?" The laugh that came through the radio speaker wasn't human. It was a low, guttural sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, Jake," the voice said. "All pretense of being Sarah gone. You should have turned right. Now we'll have to do this the hard way." Suddenly, my headlights illuminated something in the road ahead, a figure standing motionless in the swirling snow. It was vaguely Hume-shaped, but too tall, too thin, and its eyes glowed with an eerie greenish light. I yanked the wheel hard, sending my rig into a skid. The world spun around me as I fought for control. I caught a glimpse of the figure as I came past, its arms stretching out impossibly long, clawed fingers reaching for my truck. Then I was past it, fishtailing wildly on the icy road. It took everything I had to keep from jackknifing, By some miracle, I managed to straighten out, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my cheek. Stomped on the accelerator, pushing my rig to speeds it was never meant to go in these conditions. In my side mirror, I could see something moving through the woods, parallel to the road. Something fast, impossibly fast. The CB crackled to life again. "You can't run, Jake," the voice taunted. "We know these woods. We know all the roads, all the shortcuts." I switched off the radio, but it made no difference. The voice continued, seeming to come from the very air around me. "We've been so hungry, Jake. So very hungry. And you're going to feed us, one way or another." I drove like a man possessed, taking turns too fast, skating on the edge of control. More than once I felt the trailer start to swing out, nearly sending me off the road, but somehow I kept it together. Hours passed in a blur of white snow and black terror. I didn't dare stop, didn't dare even slow down. Every time I thought I'd lost them, I'd catch a glimpse of glowing eyes in the woods, or hear that terrible voice on the radio. As dawn broke, I finally burst out of the mountains and onto the plains. The storm was behind me, the road ahead clear. I pulled into the first truck stop I saw, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn off the engine. It took me 3 cups of coffee before I could even think straight. The locals gave me strange looks. I must have been a sight, wild-eyed and babbling about voices on the radio and things in the woods. Most of them wrote me off as another trucker who'd pushed himself too hard and started seeing things. But one old-timer, a leathery-faced man who introduced himself as Bill, listened to my story with a grim expression. "You're not the first to run into them," he said quietly. "Those woods, there's something wrong in them, something old and hungry." He wouldn't say more, just shook his head and walked away, leaving me with more questions than answers. I called my dispatcher and told them I was taking some personal time. Spent a week in a motel jumping at every shadow before I felt steady enough to drive again. When I did get back on the road, I took the southern route.
Haven't been anywhere near those Montana woods since. Sometimes late at night, when I'm driving and the CB is quiet, I think I hear a voice, a young woman calling for help. I never answer anymore, never will again. Because out there on the long, dark roads, not every call for help is what it seems. Sometimes, the voice on the other end of the radio isn't human at all. And sometimes the real monsters aren't the ones we can see. So if you're ever driving through the mountains of Montana on a snowy night, and you hear a desperate voice on your radio, keep driving. Don't stop. Don't answer. And whatever you do, don't turn right, because there are things out there in the darkness.
Things that are always hungry, and they know how to lure their prey. The first photo was just a blur, a dark smudge against the trees. I dismissed it as a malfunction, a quirk of the cheap trail camera. But as the images progressed night after night, the figure became clearer, closer. And on the final night, when I woke to find my camera smashed in claw marks on my tent, I realized I wasn't documenting wildlife. I was being hunted. My name is Lena, and or I guess I should say I was, a wildlife photographer specializing in endangered species. I'd spent years traveling through jungles and scaling mountains, capturing images of animals on the brink of extinction. But it was a rumor of an classified species in the Pacific Northwest that led me into the heart of Olympic National Park and into a nightmare I'm still trying to understand. It started innocently enough. I'd heard whispers in cryptozoology forums about sightings of an unknown primate in the dense forests of Washington state. Most serious scientists dismissed it as yet another Bigfoot hoax. But something about the descriptions caught my attention. They didn't match the usual Sasquatch lore. This creature was reportedly smaller, more agile, with peculiar bioluminescent markings. Intrigued, I packed my gear and headed into the wilderness. I found a secluded spot deep in the forest, miles from the nearest hiking trail, perfect isolation to set up my equipment without human interference. The first few days were uneventful. I set up my tent, scouted the area, and positioned my trail cameras at strategic points during the day. I'd hike, taking photos of the lush forest and its known inhabitants, elk, black bears, the occasional cougar. At night, I'd review the footage from my trail cams, hoping for a glimpse of my elusive quarry. It was on the fourth night that I saw it, just a dark blur at the edge of the frame, there and gone in an instant. I nearly missed it, almost dismissed it as a glitch or maybe a bat flying past the lens. But something made me pause, made me go back and look closer. There was a shape to the blur, a suggestion of a form that was neither human nor any animal I recognized. I felt a tingle of excitement. Could this be what I'd come for? The next night, it appeared again. This time, the image was clearer. A hunched figure moving on all fours, but in a way that seemed off, unnatural. And there, just barely visible, were faint glowing spots along its flank. I could hardly contain my excitement. This was it, proof of an undiscovered species. I just needed clearer images, definitive evidence. But as the days passed and I reviewed each night's footage, my excitement began to turn to unease. The creature was appearing more frequently, and it was getting closer to my cameras, closer to my camp. One image in particular stuck with me. The creature now clearly visible, was staring directly into the camera. Its eyes reflected the infrared light, glowing an eerie red. But it was the intelligence in those eyes that chilled me. This wasn't the blank stare of an animal. There was purpose there, curiosity, maybe even malice. I told myself I was anthropomorphizing, projecting human qualities onto an animal, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. A week into my stay, I woke in the middle of the night to a strange sound, a sort of chittering, like insects, but deeper, more guttural. It was close, just outside my tent. I lay there, heart pounding, barely daring to breathe. Something moved past the tent, its shadow visible through the thin fabric. I could hear it sniffing, taking long, deep inhalations, then silence. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I heard it move away, the underbrush rustling as it retreated into the forest. Come morning, I found prints around my tent. They were like nothing I'd ever seen, vaguely hand-like, but with long, curving claws at the end of each digit. I photographed them meticulously, my hand shaking as I operated the camera. That should have been my cue to pack up and leave. Any sane person would have hightailed it out of there. But I couldn't. Not when I was this close to the discovery of a lifetime. So I stayed. I moved my tent, set up more cameras. I started sleeping with my largest knife close at hand, though I wasn't sure what good it would do against a creature that could rip through canvas like paper. Each night, the images from my trail cams became clearer, more terrifying. The creature and I was becoming increasingly convinced there was only one, was larger than I'd initially thought. Its body was covered in a sort of mottled fur, with those bioluminescent patches glowing softly in the infrared images. Its face was a nightmare, almost human in structure, but with a protruding snout filled with sharp teeth and those intelligent, hungry eyes. It was studying my cameras, I realized in some images. It would be examining them closely, tilting its head as if trying to understand the device. In others, it would be looking past the camera towards my camp. I stopped sleeping more than an hour or two at a time. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves would jolt me awake, my hand clutching my knife. But it never came closer than the periphery of my camp, at least not while I was awake. On what I decided would be my last night, creature or no creature, I couldn't take the stress anymore. I set up one final camera. I positioned it facing my tent, hoping to catch the creature. If it approached during the night, I don't know what woke me there. There was no sound, no movement that I was aware of, just a sudden, overwhelming sense of wrong that jolted me from sleep. The chittering sound was back, but it wasn't outside the tent this time. It was inside, right next to me. I opened my eyes and found myself staring directly into the face of the creature. It was crouched over me, its hot breath fanning across my face, smelling of rotted meat and damp earth. Those bioluminescent patches pulsed softly, casting an eerie glow inside the tent. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to even scream. The creature tilted its head, studying me with those terrifyingly intelligent eyes. Then deliberately, it reached out one long-fingered hand and grasped the knife I'd been clutching in my sleep. It pulled it from my grip effortlessly, never breaking eye contact. I was certain I was about to die. I waited for the slash of claws, the snap of teeth, but instead the creature turned away. It moved to where my camera was set up, raised the knife, and in one swift motion smashed the device to pieces. Then it turned back to me. It made a sound, not the chittering from before, but something almost like speech. A series of clicks and guttural noises that impossibly seemed to form words. No. See us. With that, it slashed its claws across the tent wall and was gone, leaving me alone in my shredded shelter, surrounded by the wreckage of my equipment. I don't remember packing up. I don't remember the hike back to civilization. The next clear memory I have is sitting in a diner miles away from the forest, my hands shaking as I tried to hold a cup of coffee. I never reported what I saw. Who would believe me? I had no evidence. The creature had seen to that. All my cameras were destroyed, the images lost. Even the prints around my tent had been obliterated, obscured by what looked like deliberate scraping of the ground. I've spent the years since trying to make sense of what happened. Was it really an unknown species, some kind of primate that had evolved in isolation? Or was it something else entirely? Something that defied scientific classification? I don't know. But I do know this. There are things in this world that we don't understand, things that don't want to be understood. And sometimes when we go looking for the unknown looks back. I haven't set foot in a forest since that night. I've given up wildlife photography, moved to the city, where the only creatures I have to worry about are of the human variety. But sometimes late at night I wake up in a cold sweat, certain I can hear that chittering sound outside my window, and I lie there paralyzed, wondering, did I really escape that night? Or did it let me go? And if it did, why? Because deep down I can't shake the feeling that somewhere out there in the dark forest of the Pacific, waiting, watching, and maybe, just maybe, it's still hunting me. So if you're ever in the wilderness, setting up trail cams in hopes of capturing images of elusive wildlife be careful. Be very careful, because you never know what might be capturing images of you. And some things once seen can never be unseen. The first time I saw the figure darting between the cornrows, I told myself it was just my imagination. By the time I realized the truth, I was lost in an endless maze of stalks, my phone dead and night falling fast. I never should have gone into that field alone. My name's Jack, and I've worked summers on my uncle's farm since I was old enough to walk. At 17, I thought I knew every inch of the sprawling cornfields that stretched as far as the eye could see. But on that sweltering July evening, I learned that some parts of the farm held secrets darker than I could have ever imagined. It started with a malfunctioning irrigation system. Uncle Dave had noticed one section of the field wasn't getting enough water, and he asked me to check it out. Simple enough task, I thought. I'd done it 100 times before. I set out just as the sun was starting to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. The corn was at its full height, easily towering over my 6-foot frame. I'd always loved walking through the fields at this time of year. feeling dwarfed by the lush green stalk stretching endlessly in every direction. The faulty section was near the center of the field, so I had a good 10-minute walk ahead of me. I moved quickly, wanting to get the job done before dark. The corn rustled around me as I pushed through the leaves, rough against my bare arms. About halfway to my destination, I heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Not the usual chorus of crickets or the distant loo of cattle, but something else. A sort of skittering noise, like something moving rapidly through the corn, just out of sight. I paused, listening intently for a moment. There was nothing but the normal sounds of a summer evening on the farm. Then I heard it again, closer. This time, a rush of movement, the cornstalks swaying unnaturally. About 20 feet to my left. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and uncertain in the vast field. "Is someone there?" No response, just another rustle of movement, this time behind me. I turned quickly, heart starting to race. That's when I saw it. Just a glimpse, really, a dark figure darting between the rows of corn. It was there and gone so fast I couldn't make out any details, just an impression of something large moving in a way that didn't seem quite human. I told myself I was imagining things. It was probably just a deer, I reasoned, or maybe one of the farm dogs had gotten into the field, but deep down, I knew it wasn't either of those things. I picked up my pace, no longer meandering but moving with purpose towards the field. Irrigation system. The sooner I fixed the problem, the sooner I could get out of this field, but as I walked, I became increasingly disoriented. The rows all looked the same, an endless sea of green. I could have sworn I should have reached the faulty section by now, but there was no sign of it. I pulled out my phone, intending to use the GPS to get my bearings. My stomach dropped when I saw the screen. No signal. And worse, the battery was almost dead. I'd forgotten to charge it last night. That's when I heard the skittering noise again, much closer this time, close enough that I could hear something else. Underneath the sound of movement, a low guttural growl that raised the hair on the back of my neck. I started to run. I crashed through the corn, no longer caring about following the rows. All sense of direction was lost as I fled from the unseen presence that I could feel pursuing me. Cornstalks whipped at my face and arms, leaving stinging cuts, but I didn't slow down. I don't know how long I ran. It could have been minutes or hours. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that green maze. But eventually, gasping for breath, I had to stop. I bent over, hands on my knees, trying to gulp in air. The sun had almost set now, the light fading rapidly. As my breathing slowed, I realized I couldn't hear anything. No crickets, no birds, nothing but the sound of my own panting breaths. Then a rustle directly in front of me. I straightened up slowly, my eyes straining in the dim light. The corn parted and a figure stepped out into the small clearing I'd found myself in. My mind struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. It was vaguely humanoid in shape, but wrong. Too tall, too thin. Its arms hung down past its knees, ending in hands tipped with long, curved claws. But it was the face that made my blood run cold. Where features should have been, there was only smooth, blank skin, no eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a featureless oval of pet flesh. I stood frozen, unable to move, unable to even scream. The creature cocked its head to one side as if studying me. Then, impossibly, a seam appeared in the smooth face. It split open, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. That's when I found my voice. I screamed, a sound of pure terror that seemed to startle the creature. It flinched back, and I seized the opportunity. I turned and ran again. No longer caring about direction or finding my way out, I just needed to get away from that thing. I crashed through the corn branches and leaves slashing at me. I could hear it behind me, moving impossibly fast. That skittering sound was all around me now, as if there were multiple creatures converging on my position. Just when I thought my legs would give out, I burst out of the cornfield. I found myself on the dirt road that ran along the edge of the property. In the distance, I could see the lights of the farmhouse. I ran towards those lights like my life depended on it because I was pretty sure it did. I don't remember much of what happened next. I have vague memories of. Bursting into the kitchen, babbling incoherently to my startled aunt and uncle. I remember the look of concern on their faces. Turning to alarm as they took in my scratched and bleeding state, Uncle Dave got out his rifle and went to check the fields. But of course he found nothing. No strange creatures, no signs of anything unusual, just corn, stretching as far as the eye could see in the beam of his flashlight. They thought I'd gotten heat stroke, become disoriented and panicked in the field, and part of me wanted to believe that, wanted to think it had all been some kind of hallucination brought on by dehydration and exhaustion. But I know what I saw, what I heard, what I felt, pursuing me through that cornfield. I left for college a month later, earlier than planned. I told my parents I was eager to get settled in my dorm, but the truth was, I couldn't stand to be on that farm anymore, couldn't bear to look at those fields and wonder what might be hiding in them. It's been 5 years since that night. I'm finishing up my degree now in a city, far from any cornfields. I thought I'd put it all behind me. But last week I got a call from my aunt. Uncle Dave had disappeared. He'd gone out to check on the irrigation system one evening and never came back. They found his truck parked at the edge of the field, but no sign of him. As she spoke, I could hear the panic in her voice, the fear, but underneath that I heard something else. The faint sound of rustling corn carrying through the phone line, and just before the call cut out, I heard it. That skittering noise that has haunted my nightmares for years. I'm on my way back to the farm now. I know, it's crazy. I know I should stay far away from those fields. But I can't abandon my family. I have to know the truth. So if you're ever driving through farm country on a summer evening, and you see a sea of corn stretching to the horizon, remember this: not all fields are what they seem. And sometimes the real danger isn't getting lost in the rows. It's what might find you there. Because in some cornfields, something is waiting, watching, hungry. And it's only a matter of time before it decides to harvest the moment we set foot on that abandoned yacht. I knew something was terribly wrong. The eerie silence, the signs of struggle, the increasingly frantic logbook entries, it all pointed to a nightmare we couldn't begin to imagine. But by the time we realized the true horror of what had happened, it was already too late. We weren't alone on that ghost ship, and our uninvited guests were hungry.
My name's Mike, and I've been a commercial fisherman out of Gloucester, Massachusetts for the better part of 2 decades. I've seen my share of strange things out on the water, freak storms, impossible waves, even what I swear was a sea monster once, though no one believes that story after a few beers. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what happened that day on the Atlantic. It was supposed to be a routine fishing trip, me and my crew. My first mate Jack and our greenhorn Charlie had set out at dawn, heading for our usual spots about 100 miles offshore. The weather was perfect, clear skies and calm seas. We were looking forward to a good haul. We'd been out for about 6 hours when Jack spotted it. A yacht, drifting aimlessly about a half mile off our starboard side. It was a big one, probably 80 feet or so. The kind of boat that costs more than I'd make in 10 lifetimes. Should we check it out? Charlie asked. His voice tinged with excitement. The kid was always eager for anything out of the ordinary. I hesitated. Maritime law says you're obligated to render assistance to vessels in distress, but something about this didn't feel right. The yacht seemed intact, no visible damage. Why wasn't anyone on deck? Why hadn't they radioed for help? But in the end, duty won out over my unease. Bring us alongside, I ordered Jack, but keep the engine running if anything seems off. We're out.
Dean.
As we drew closer, the wrongness of the situation became more apparent. The yacht was pristine, almost too clean, no signs of life on deck, no movement at all. It was as if the boat had been abandoned in a hurry. We pulled up alongside and hailed them. No response. I tried the radio. Nothing but static. I don't like this, Mike, Jack muttered, his weathered face creased with concern. I didn't either, but we were here now. Let's take a quick look, I said. Charlie, you stay here with the boat. Jack and I will check it out. If anything happens, anything at all, you radio the Coast Guard and get the hell out of here. Understood. Charlie nodded, his earlier excitement replaced by nervous energy. Jack and I boarded the yacht, the gentle lap of waves against the hull, the only sound. The deck was immaculate, not a rope out of place. But as we approached the main cabin, I noticed something odd. Scratches on the door.
Frame deep gouges in the polished wood. I exchanged a glance with Jack. He'd seen it too. We both drew the filling knives we kept on our belts. Not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. I pushed open the door, wincing at the creak of hinges. The interior was dim, shafts of sunlight filtering through partially closed blinds. As my eyes adjusted, I took in the scene before us. The main salon was a mess. Furniture overturned, cushions slashed open, and there, on the plush carpet, dark stains that could only be blood. Jesus, Jack whispered. What the hell happened here? I shook my head, my mouth dry. Let's check the rest of the boat, quick and quiet. If we find anyone alive or otherwise, we radio the Coast Guard immediately. We moved through the yacht, room by room. The galley was ransacked, cupboards emptied, food scattered everywhere. The staterooms were in similar disarray, clothes strewn about, more of those unsettling blood stains on the sheets. But it was what we found in the captain's quarters that chilled me to the bone. The room was relatively untouched, save for the desk. Papers were scattered everywhere, and in the center lay an open logbook. The early entries were mundane, weather reports, course changes, nothing unusual. But as we flipped through the pages, the tone changed dramatically. The last entry, dated just 2 days ago, was a scroll of barely legible handwriting. They're inside the walls, God help us. They're inside the walls. If anyone finds this, don't. The entry ended abruptly, a long ink streak trailing off the page. Jack and I looked at each other. The same thought mirrored in our eyes. We needed to get off this boat. Now. That's when we heard it. A skittering sound, like something moving inside the walls. At first I thought it might be rats, but rats don't make the walls bulge and ripple, like something massive was moving through them. Run, I yelled, all pretense of stealth forgotten. We burst out of the captain's quarters, racing for the deck. Behind us, I could hear the sound of tearing metal, of something bursting free from its confinement. We emerged into the sunlight, gasping for breath. Charlie was at the railing of our boat, eyes wide with fear. Start the engine, I bellowed. We're leaving. But before we could make it to our vessel, something erupted from the yacht's deck. The polished wood splintered as a creature burst through, all writhing tentacles and gnashing teeth. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before. Part octopus, part eel, but twisted into something nightmarish and wrong. More of them followed, pouring out of every opening in the yacht. They moved with terrifying speed, undulating across the deck towards us. Jack was closest. To our boat, he leaped the gap, landing hard on our deck. I was right behind him, my muscles screaming as I pushed myself to jump farther than I ever had before. I made it, barely. Tentacles lashed at my legs as I sailed through the air, but they fell short by inches. Go, 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 I shouted at Charlie, who was frozen at the wheel, his face a mask of terror. The roar of our engine coming to life snapped him out of it. He threw the throttle forward and we lurched away from the yacht, but the creatures weren't done with us. They poured over the side of the yacht, hitting the water and swimming with unnatural speed. I could see more of them bursting out of the hull below the waterline. The yacht's immaculate white paint stained with spreading tendrils of some black, oily substance. Faster, Jack yelled, grabbing a gaff hook and swinging it at a tentacle that had latched onto our stern. Charlie pushed our boat to its limits, the engine screaming in protest. Slowly, agonizingly, we began to pull away from the writhing mass of creatures pursuing us. I don't know how long we ran. Hours, maybe. We didn't slow down until the yacht was long out of sight and our fuel gauge was dangerously low. Only then did we dare to breathe, to try and process what we'd seen. We radioed the Coast Guard trying to explain what had happened. They didn't believe us, of course. How could they? It sounded insane, even to us, and we'd lived through it. They sent out a cutter to investigate, but by the time they reached the coordinates we gave them, there was no sign of the yacht. No debris, no oil slick, nothing to indicate a boat had ever been there. We were questioned for hours when we got back to port. The authorities thought we were running drugs or had stumbled upon some kind of smuggling operation. They couldn't wrap their heads around what we were telling them. In the end, they let us go. No evidence of wrongdoing, they said, just the ravings of fishermen who'd been out in the sun too long. But I know what I saw, what we all saw. There's something out there in the Atlantic, something that doesn't belong in this world, something that can infest a ship, hollow it out from the inside, and wait for unsuspecting victims. I don't go out on the water anymore. Can't bring myself to set foot on a boat. Jack and Charlie are the same way. We've all found jobs on land, as far from the ocean as we can get. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear it. That skittering sound, like something moving inside my walls. And I lie awake wondering, did we really escape that day? Or did we bring something back with us? So if you're ever out on the ocean and you come across a drifting boat, pristine and seemingly abandoned, don't approach it, don't board it, just run. Run as fast and as far as you can. Because some ghost ships aren't empty. And some nightmares don't end when you think you've escaped. The moment our flashlights began to flicker, I knew we'd made a terrible mistake. The darkness of the abandoned mine seemed to press in around us, hungry and alive. And as the last light died, leaving us in pitch blackness, I heard it. The sound of something ancient and angry, stirring in the depths. My name's Alex, and I've been an urban explorer for the better part of a decade. There's something intoxicating about uncovering the secrets of abandoned places, about walking where few have dared to tread in years, maybe even centuries. But our expedition into the old Holloway silver mine would prove to be my last. It started, as these things often do, with a rumor. Whispers on message boards about a vast network of tunnels beneath the mountains of Colorado, untouched since the mine's mysterious closure in 1923. The stories varied. Some said the miners had struck a rich new vein right before the shutdown. Others swore they'd uncovered something that wasn't silver at all, something that led to the mine being sealed off by the government. Whatever the truth, it was too tempting to resist. I gathered a small team, my usual exploring partner, Sam Ago, and a local guide named Mike, who claimed to know a way in. We packed our gear, told ourselves we were prepared for anything, and set off into the wilderness. The entrance to the mine was hidden behind a tangle of overgrown vegetation, the old warning signs barely visible beneath a century of neglect. Mike led us to a section of the hillside that looked no different from any other, then pushed aside a curtain of vines to reveal a narrow opening. This was an old air shaft, he explained, his voice tinged with excitement. The main entrance was collapsed decades ago, but this should take us right into the heart of the mine. We switched on our headlamps and entered single file, the beam of light from my lamp seeming pitifully small against the vast darkness ahead. The air was cool and damp, heavy with the musty smell of long abandoned spaces. For the first hour or so, everything went smoothly. We marveled at the old equipment left behind, rusted carts and pickaxes frozen in time. Sam took photos, The flash of her camera momentarily illuminated vast chambers carved out of the living rock. But as we delved deeper, an uneasy feeling began to creep over me. The tunnels seemed to twist and turn in ways that defied logic, leading us ever downward, and there was something about the quality of the darkness that felt wrong. It seemed to swallow our light, pressing in around the edges of our beams, as if trying to consume them. "Does anyone else feel like we're being watched?" Sam whispered, her voice echoing strangely in the confined space. I was about to dismiss her concern when I saw it. A flicker of movement. Swung my flashlight towards it, but there was nothing there, just more darkness. "It's probably just bats," Mike said, but he didn't sound convinced. We pressed on, the uneasy feeling growing with every step. That's when our light started to fail. It happened gradually at first. My headlamp dimmed, then brightened again. Sam's flashlight flickered intermittently. We all checked our batteries, but they were fresh. We'd put new ones in just before entering the mine. "This doesn't make sense," I muttered, tapping my lamp. "These should last for days." As if in response to my words, all of our lights went out simultaneously, plunging us into absolute darkness. For a moment, we stood frozen, the sudden absence of light disorienting. Then Sam let out a nervous laugh. "Okay, very funny, guys. Who turned out the lights?" But it wasn't a joke. No matter what we did, none of our lights would come back on. Even the screen of my phone remained stubbornly dark. "Everyone stay calm," I said, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. Let's just stay put for a minute. Our eyes will adjust." But they didn't. The darkness remained absolute, pressing against my eyeballs like a physical thing. I couldn't even see my hand in front of my face. That's when we heard it. A sound echoing from deep within the mine. At first it was faint, a sort of scraping noise, like stone grinding against stone, but it grew louder, closer. "What is that?" Sam whispered, her voice trembling. Before I could answer, another sound joined the first, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the very rock around us. It was a sound that didn't belong in this world, ancient and hungry and undeniably alive. "Run!" I yelled, grabbing for Sam's hand. In the darkness, we ran blindly through the tunnels, one hand on the rough wall to guide us. The sounds behind us grew louder, accompanied now by the unmistakable noise of something large moving through the M-shafts, something that was gaining on us. I don't know how long we ran. Time lost all meaning in that lightless maze. We stumbled over unseen obstacles, scraped against jagged rocks, all the while with that terrible sound growing ever closer. Suddenly, my outstretched hand met empty air. We'd reached some kind of chamber. The echoes of our panicked breathing suggested it was vast. "Stop," I gasped. "We need to figure out where we are." As we stood there, gulping in air, I became aware of a change in the atmosphere. The air felt different here, less stale with a faint breeze that suggested a connection to the surface. I think we might be near an exit," I said, hope rising in my chest. But that hope was short-lived, because at that moment we heard it again, that grinding, rumbling sound, only now it wasn't just behind us. It was all around us, coming from that AdMap every direction. And then impossibly we saw light, not the warm, comforting light of the sun or our flashlights, but a cold, pale bioluminescence that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the chamber. As our eyes adjusted to this faint illumination, I almost wished for the darkness again, because now we could see what had been pursuing us. They were everywhere. Creatures that defied description, like a nightmarish fusion of insect and reptile. Their segmented bodies clung to the walls and ceiling, each easily the size of a car. Multifaceted eyes glowed with an alien intelligence fixed unblinkingly upon us, but it was the largest creature that drew our terrified gaze. It sat in the center of the chamber, a monstrosity that dwarfed its brethren. Its massive jaws worked slowly, grinding the stones it seemed to feed upon. This, I realized with dawning horror, was the source of the grinding sound we'd heard. For a moment that felt like an eternity. There was perfect stillness. We stood frozen in terror as the creatures regarded us with cold, alien curiosity. Then, as one, they began to move towards us. What happened next is a blur in my memory. There was screaming, maybe mine, maybe Sam's or Mike's. We ran again, no longer caring about direction, just desperate to escape the horrors behind us. By some miracle, we found another tunnel. We sprinted down it, the scrabbling sounds of pursuit echoing behind us. Just when I thought my legs would give out, I saw it, a pinprick of natural light ahead. We burst out of the mine into the fading evening light, gasping and stumbling. We didn't stop running until we reached our car, parked what felt like miles away on a lonely dirt road. As we sped away, I looked back at the mountain that housed the Holloway mine. For a moment, I thought I saw movement at the entrance we'd emerged from, a glimpse of something large and insectile withdrawing into the darkness. Then it was gone, leaving me to wonder if I'd imagined it. We drove straight to the nearest police station, babbling our story to increasingly skeptical officers. They searched the area we described, but found nothing out of the ordinary. No strange creatures, no vast chambers filled with bioluminescent horror, just an old abandoned mine slowly being reclaimed by nature. Part of me wants to believe it was all a hallucination, some kind of shared delusion brought on by the darkness and the thin air of the mountains. But I know what I saw, what I heard, what I felt in those lightless tunnels. I don't go exploring anymore. Can't bring myself to enter so much as a dark basement these days. Sam and Mike are the same way. We've all found new hobbies, new passions that keep us firmly in the light. But sometimes, late at night, I wake up in a cold sweat. In those moments between sleep and waking, I swear I can hear it, that grinding, rumbling sound. And I lie there, heart pounding, wondering, did we really escape that day, or did we bring something back with us? Something that slowly... To explore an abandoned mind, to delve into the dark places beneath the earth, some secrets are meant to stay buried, and some darknesses once seen can never be unseen, because sometimes the real monsters aren't hiding in the shadows. They are the shadows, and they're always hungry for more. The first time I noticed something was off, it was the silence. No footsteps in the hallway, no chatter from neighboring rooms, just an eerie quiet that seemed to press in from all sides. By the time I realized the truth, it was too late. I was trapped in a nightmare, and the hotel itself seemed to be my jailer. My name is David, and I'm, or I guess I should say I was, a traveling salesman, medical supplies to be specific. I spent more nights in hotels than in my own bed, crisscrossing the country, living out of a suitcase. I thought I'd seen it all when it came to accommodations, from five-star luxury to roach-infested dives, but nothing could have prepared me for room 313 at the Pinewood Inn. It was meant to be a routine overnight day, just another forgettable hotel in another forgettable town. I'd driven for hours through a relentless downpour, the windshield wipers barely keeping up with the deluge, when I saw the flickering neon sign of the Pinewood Inn. I was ready to call it a night. The lobby was deserted when I entered, water dripping from my coat to form a puddle on the faded carpet. A bell sat on the front desk, and I gave it a ring. The sound echoed unnaturally in the empty space. After a moment, a man emerged from a back room. He was tall and gaunt, with deep-set eyes that seemed to look right through me. "Checking in?" he asked, his voice a dry whisper. I nodded, suppressing a shiver. Something about this place felt off, but I chalked it up to exhaustion in the gloomy weather. "Just one night," I said, fishing out my credit card. The clerk's long fingers danced over an ancient-looking computer. "Room 3113, he said, sliding a key across the desk, an actual metal key, not the key cards most hotels use these days. "Third-floor elevators to your left." I took the key, noticing how cold it felt in my hand. Thanks. Is there anywhere nearby I could grab a bite to eat? The clerk's face remained impassive. Kitchens closed, vending machines on each floor, great dinner of champions. I thanked him and headed for the elevator, dragging my wheeled suitcase behind me. The elevator creaked and groaned its way up to the third floor. As the door slid open, I was struck again by the silence. Shouldn't there be some noise in a hotel? TVs from other rooms, people talking, something. I made my way down the dimly lit hallway, the worn carpet muffling my footsteps. Room 313 was at the very end, tucked away in a corner. The key stuck a bit in the lock, but with some jiggling, the door swung open. The room was unremarkable, a bit dated maybe, with floral wallpaper that had seen better days, and a TV that looked like it was from the 90s. But it was clean, and the bed looked comfortable enough. I set the suitcase down and flopped onto the bed, the events of the long day catching up with me. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew I was jolted awake by a sound. It took me a moment to place it. Knocking. Someone was knocking on my door. I glanced at the bedside clock. 27 a.m. Who the hell would be knocking at this hour? "Hello?" I called out, my voice rough with sleep. No response, just another series of knocks, more insistent this time. I got up. A sense of unease growing in the pit of my stomach. I approached the door, but something made me hesitate before opening it. Instead, I put my eye to the peephole. The hallway outside was empty. I shook my head, trying to clear the cobwebs of sleep. Maybe I dreamed the knocking, but even as I thought it, the sound came again. Only this time, it wasn't coming from the door. It was coming from the window. My blood ran cold. I was on the third floor. Slowly, I turned towards the window. The curtains were drawn, but I could see a shadow moving behind them. A human shape, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin. I stood frozen, unable to move, unable to even breathe. The knocking continued, growing louder, more frantic. Then suddenly it stopped. For a long moment there was only silence. Then a voice. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once, seeming to seep out of the very walls. "Let us in, David," it whispered. "We've been waiting for you." That broke my paralysis. I lunged for the door, yanking it open and bursting into the hallway. I had to get out of here, had to find help. But the hallway, it was wrong. It seemed to stretch on forever. The doors repeating endlessly. I turned back to look at my room, but 313 had vanished. Every door now bore the same number, SU0. I ran, my heart pounding in my chest. The hallway seemed to twist and turn, defying the laws of physics. No matter how far I went, I couldn't find the elevator, the stairs, any way out. And all the while I could hear them, whispers and scratches coming from behind every door. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision, a shadow darting across the hall, a hand reaching out from a doorway, but whenever I turned to look, there was nothing there. I don't know how long I ran, hours maybe. My legs burned, my lungs screamed for air, but I didn't dare stop because I knew with a bone-deep certainty that if I stopped, they would get me. Finally, I saw it, the elevator. I practically fell into it, jabbing frantically at the lobby button. As the doors began to close, I saw them, figures emerging from the rooms, gliding down the hallway towards me. Their faces, God, their faces where the doors slammed shut, cutting off my view. I sagged against the wall, gulping in air. The elevator began to descend, and for a moment I allowed myself to hope. Maybe this nightmare was over. Maybe I'd get to the lobby and find everything normal. But when the doors opened, I wasn't in. Alive sheets twisting like tentacles. And there, reflected in the mirror, was a figure. But it wasn't me. It wore my face, but the eyes. The eyes were black voids, endless and hungry. It smiled, revealing too many teeth sharp and gleaming. "Welcome home, David," it said. Its voice a chorus of whispers. "We've been waiting so long." I screamed. I screamed until my throat was raw, until I tasted blood. I screamed as the room twisted around me, as unseen hands grabbed at me from the shadows. And then I woke up. I was in my car, parked at a rest stop. Rain pattered against the windshield. My phone was buzzing. A missed call from my boss, wondering why I hadn't shown up for my meeting. For a long moment, I just sat there, trying to get my bearings. It had all been a dream. A vivid, terrifying nightmare, but just a dream. I must have pulled over when I got too tired to drive, fallen asleep at the wheel. I started the car, ready to put this all behind me. But as I pulled out of the rest stop, I caught sight of something in my rearview mirror that made my blood run cold. There on the back seat was a key, an old-fashioned metal key, with a tag attached. Room 3113, it read. Pinewood Inn. I drove. I drove and didn't stop until I was 3 states away. I quit my job, sold my house, changed my name. I don't stay in hotels anymore. Can't bring myself to even look at one. Because I know the truth now. The Pinewood Inn is out there, waiting. It might not be in the same place, might not even look the same, but it's waiting for me, for you, for anyone unlucky enough to check in. So if you're ever driving late at night, tired and looking for a place to rest, and you see a hotel you don't remember being there before, keep driving. No matter how exhausted you are, no matter how bad the weather is, just keep driving. Because some rooms you check into, you never really check out of. And in some hotels, every night is an eternity. The first entry in the journal was mundane. The last was a frantic scrawl that chilled me to the bone. By the time I heard those heavy footsteps on the cabin's porch, I knew I was living the same nightmare that had consumed the previous occupant. And as the door handle began to turn, I realized with horrifying certainty that I wouldn't be leaving these woods alive. My name is Chris, and until a week ago I was just another burned-out city dweller looking for an escape when I stumbled across an ad for a remote cabin rental deep in the Adara. It seemed like the perfect solution. A month of solitude, surrounded by pristine wilderness, no cell service or Wi-Fi to tether me to the stress of my normal life. Just me, the trees, and the promise of peace and quiet. Exactly as advertised. Rustic, secluded, perched on the edge of a small clearing with a breathtaking view of the mountains. As I unloaded my supplies, I felt the tension of the past few months already beginning to melt away. That first evening was idyllic. I sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, a glass of whiskey in hand. The only sounds were the rustle of leaves in the breeze and the distant call of a loon on some hidden lake. This, I thought, was exactly what I needed. It wasn't until I went inside to prepare dinner that I noticed the journal. It was sitting on the small writing desk in the corner, a leather-bound notebook that looked well used. Curious, I flipped it open. The first entry was dated 3 months ago. Finally made it to the cabin. The drive was longer than expected, but the silence up here is already worth it. Looking forward to a productive month of writing. The entries that followed were relatively mundane. Observations about the weather, notes on the local wildlife, progress updates on whatever the previous occupant had been writing. But as I flipped through the pages, I noticed a shift in tone. The entries became shorter, more fragmented. There was an increasing sense of unease permeating the words. 2 weeks in, there was this. Heard strange noises last night. Not an animal, at least not like any I've ever heard. Almost sounded like words, but in no language I know. Probably just the wind. A few days later, the noises are getting closer. Not the wind. Definitely not the wind. Saw something moving at the edge of the clearing today, too big to be a deer. Moved all wrong for a bear. What the hell is out there? The final entry, dated just a week ago, sent a chill down my spine. It's here. God help me, it's here. If anyone finds this, don't stay. Run. Run before it's too. The entry ended abruptly, a long ink streak trailing off the page, as if the writer had been suddenly interrupted. I closed the journal, my hands shaking slightly. This had to be some kind of joke, right? A prank by the owner to spook the city folk? But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The fear in those final entries was too raw, too real. I thought about leaving right then and there, but it was already dark, and the idea of navigating those treacherous mountain roads at night was daunting. I decided to stay the night and leave first thing in the morning. Sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the cabin's old timbers, every rustle from the forest outside had me sitting bolt upright, straining my ears. But eventually exhaustion won out, and I fell into a fitful slumber. I woke to silence. Not the peaceful quiet of the previous evening, but a heavy, oppressive silence that seemed to press in on me from all sides. No bird song, no insects buzzing, not even the whisper of the farmer. Of wind through the trees, it was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I got up my movements feeling strangely sluggish, as if I was moving through water. The morning light filtering through the window seemed dim and gray despite the cloudless sky outside. That's when I saw it. A footprint in the dirt just outside the cabin's front window. A huge print, easily twice the size of my own foot, with long, curved claw marks at the end of each toe. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't possible. There was no animal in these woods that could leave a print like that. Unless I thought of the journal, of the writer's increasing panic. Too big to be a deer, moved all wrong. For a bear. I backed away from the window, my heart pounding. I had to get out of here, now. I threw my belongings haphazard into my bag, not bothering to pack neatly. Every few seconds I glanced out the windows, half expecting to see some monstrous shape emerge from the tree line. Just as I was about to make a break for my car, I heard it. A low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was a sound that didn't belong in this world, ancient and hungry and undeniably alive. I froze, my hand on the doorknob. The growl came again, closer this time, and then footsteps, heavy, deliberate footsteps coming from the other side of the cabin. With a jolt of terror, I realized they were circling around towards the front porch. I backed away from the door, looking frantically for a weapon, an escape route, anything. But there was nowhere to go. The footsteps grew louder, the floorboards of the porch creaking under immense weight. Then silence, for a long moment. Nothing moved. I stood there, scarcely daring to breathe. My eyes fixed on the door. The handle began to turn, slowly, inexorably. I'd like to say I faced whatever was on the other side bravely, that I stood my ground and fought. But the truth is, blind panic took over. I ran. I burst out the back door, sprinting for the trees behind me. I heard the front door splinter, followed by a roar that shook the very air. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just ran. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. I had no idea where I was going. My only thought was to put as much distance between myself and the cabin as possible. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that endless green maze, but eventually my legs gave out, and I collapsed against a tree, gulping in air as my panic receded. I realized I had made a terrible mistake in my blind flight. I had run deeper into the wilderness, hopelessly lost. I had no supplies, no phone, no way to call for help, and somewhere out there, something was hunting me. The rest of that day passed in a haze. find my way back to the road or to any sign of civilization, but the forest all looked the same. As night fell, the temperature dropped, and a light rain began to fall. I under a large tree, shivering, straining my ears for any sound of pursuit, but there was only the soft patter of rain on leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. Just as I was about to drift off into an exhausted sleep, I saw it, a flicker of light through the trees. Hope surged through me. A house, a road. I stumbled towards the light, my fatigue forgotten. As I drew closer, I could make out a structure. My heart leapt. It was the cabin. Somehow I had made a huge circle and ended up back where I started. Relief flooded through me as I burst into the clearing, but it died just as quickly. This wasn't my cabin. It was similar, yes, but older, more weathered. And there, carved into the door in jagged, desperate strokes, was a message. Don't enter. It's still here. I stood there, rain soaking through my clothes, staring at those words. And that's when I heard it again, that low, inhuman growl coming from just behind me. I'm writing this now in a new journal I found inside this cabin. I don't know how long I can stay here or if there's any escape, but if anyone finds this, please heed my warning. Don't stay in these woods. Don't seek out solitude in this forgotten corner of the wilderness, because something ancient dwells here, something patient and hungry. And once it knows you're here, it never stops hunting. So if you're reading this, run. Run now, while you still can, and pray it hasn't already caught your scent. The first time we saw the impossibly tall, thin figure in the distance, we laughed it off as a mirage. By the time we realized the truth, we were hopelessly lost in an endless sea of sand, with something inhuman stalking our every move. And as our water supply dwindled under the merciless sun, we began to understand that in this desert, death wasn't the worst fate that could befall us. My name's Alex, and until 2 weeks ago, I was just your average thrill-seeking tourist. My girlfriend Jess and I had been planning this Southwest road trip for months, eager to escape the dreary Seattle winter for some sun and adventure. We'd mapped out a route that would take us through some of the most stunning desert landscapes in the country, with plenty of opportunities for hiking and photography. The trouble started on day 5 of our trip. We just left a small town in eastern Arizona, heading for a remote area known for its striking rock formations and supposed spiritual energy. The guy at the local gas station had warned us to stick to the main roads, muttering something about people going missing in the backcountry. But we were young, confident, and more than a little arrogant. We thought we knew better. "Come on, Alex," Jess had said, her eyes sparkling with excitement as she pointed to a dirt road veering off the highway. "That looks way more interesting than the route on the map. Let's check it out." I hesitated for a moment, remembering the gas station attendant's warning. But one look at Jess's eager face and I caved. "All right," I said, turning onto the unmarked road, "but just for a little while. We don't want to get lost out here." If only I'd known then how prophetic those words would be. At first, the detour seemed like a great idea. The scenery was breathtaking. Towering mesas, bizarre rock formations, and endless vistas of red sand stretching to the horizon. We stopped several times for Jess to take photos, marveling at the alien beauty of the landscape. It was during one of these stops that we saw it for the first time. Jess was setting up a shot of a particularly striking rock spire when she suddenly froze her camera halfway to her face. "Alex," she said, her voice oddly strained. "Do you see that?" I followed her gaze, squinting against the harsh sunlight. At first, I didn't see anything. Then, shimmering in the heat haze on the horizon, I saw a figure. It was unnaturally tall and thin, standing perfectly still amidst the undulating waves of hot air. "Probably just a weird-looking cactus," I said, though a chill ran down my spine. Despite the oppressive heat. The heat can play tricks on your eyes out here. Jess nodded. but she didn't seem convinced. "Yeah, you're probably right," she said, but she didn't raise her camera again. "Maybe we should head back to the main road," I agreed, suddenly eager to be back on familiar terrain. But as I turned our rented UV around, I realized with a sinking feeling that I wasn't sure which way we'd come from. The dirt road we'd been following had split several times, and in my distraction, I hadn't been paying close attention to our route. "No problem," I said, trying to keep my voice calm for Jess's sake. "We've got GPS on our phones. We'll just backtrack." But when I pulled out my phone, my blood ran cold. No signal, not even a single bar. "Okay, don't panic," I said, as much to myself as to Jess. "We've got plenty of water, and we can't be that far from the highway. We'll just pick a direction and drive. We're bound to hit a main road eventually." Jess nodded, but I could see the fear starting to creep into her eyes. "What about that thing we saw?" she asked quietly. "It was nothing," I said firmly. "Just a trick of the light. We're going to be fine." I wish I could say I believed my own words. We drove for hours, the sun beating down mercilessly on the car. The air conditioning struggled against the heat, and we rationed our water carefully, all too aware of how quickly dehydration could become deadly in this environment. As the day wore on, the landscape seemed to shift and change around us. Rock formations that I could have sworn we'd passed before appeared again and again, as if we were driving in circles, despite maintaining a straight course. And always there was that figure on the horizon. Alarming suddenness, the temperature plummeting as the sun dipped below the horizon, we decided to stop and wait for daylight, hoping to conserve fuel and maybe spot some lights from a town or highway. As we sat in the darkened car, the desert came alive with strange sounds, rustlings and skittering that seemed to come from all around us, punctuated by eerie, ululating cries that were like no animal I'd ever heard. "Alex," Jess whispered, clutching my arm. "What is that?" I opened my mouth to offer some comforting lie, but the words died in my throat because there in the moonlight I saw them. Figures, dozens of them, moving across the dunes with an unnatural gliding motion. They were headed straight for our car. I started the engine with shaking hands, peeling away in a spray of sand in the rearview mirror. I could see the figures pursuing us, moving far faster than anything human had a right to. We drove through the night, fueled by terror and the last dregs of our water supply. As dawn broke, we found ourselves in a vast salt flat, white crystals stretching endlessly in every direction. The pursuers were gone, but so was any sign of the world we knew. "This is impossible," Jess said, her voice harsher from thirst and fear. "We can't have driven this far. Where are we?" I had no answer for her. The laws of geography, of physics itself, seemed to have broken down. We were in a place that shouldn't exist, hunted by things that shouldn't be real. As the sun climbed higher, the heat became unbearable. Our water was gone and the car's fuel gauge was hovering near empty. In desperation, we decided to leave the vehicle and try to walk to safety. It was a mistake. Without the car's meager protection, we were exposed to the full fury of the desert. The sun seared our skin, the salt burned our eyes, and every step was an agony on the blistering hot ground. We hadn't gone more than a mile when Jess collapsed. I tried to carry her, but in my weakened state I could barely stand myself. As I knelt beside her, cradling her head in my lap, I saw it again. The tall, thin figure, no longer on the horizon but standing mere yards away. Up close it was even more terrifying. Its body was impossibly elongated, joints bending at unnatural angles. Its face, if you could call it that, was a blank expanse of skin with only the suggestion of features. And yet somehow I knew it was looking right at us. As I watched, paralyzed with fear and exhaustion, more figures emerged from the shimmering heat haze. They surrounded us, their bodies swaying slightly like reeds in a breeze that didn't exist. One of them reached out a long, spindly arm, its hand tipped with slights. Needle-like fingers gently touched Jess's forehead. She gasped, her eyes flying open, but there was no recognition in them. Only a blank, glassy stick. dare, I tried to pull her away, to scream, to do anything, but my body wouldn't respond. The same long-fingered hand touched my face and the world shifted. I found myself standing upright, the fatigue and thirst suddenly gone. Jess was beside me, but when I looked at her, I realized with horror that she wasn't Jess anymore. Her body had elongated, her features smoothing out into that same blank expanse I'd seen on our captors. I tried to speak, to call her name, but no sound came out. Instead, I felt my own body beginning to change, stretching and twisting into a new form. And then suddenly, I understood. This wasn't an ending, but a beginning. We hadn't been hunted. We'd been called, drawn to this place, this impossible desert, to become something new, something ancient and patient and utterly alien. As my transformation completed, I felt my awareness expand. I could sense the vastness of the desert, could feel the presence of countless others like us waiting in the shimmering heat mirages for unwary travelers to stumble into our realm. And I knew, with a certainty that transcended my former human understanding, that we would wait for years, for centuries, for however long it took, because eventually, someone else would come. Someone else would take a wrong turn, would see a figure in the distance and dismiss it as a mirage. And when they did, we would be waiting, ready to welcome them into our endless, shimmering desert, ready to help them shed their fragile human forms and join us in our timeless vigil. So if you're ever driving through the Southwest and you see a dirt road leading off into stunning, untouched desert, stick to the main highway. Don't be tempted by the beauty of the unknown, because in some deserts, what looks like a mirage might be all too real. And some transformations once begun can never be undone. The moment my light illuminated that pale humanoid figure deep in the underwater cave, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. But by the time I realized the true horror of my situation, I was lost in a labyrinth of narrow passages, my air supply rapidly depleting, and something that definitely wasn't human was hunting me in the darkness. My name's Sarah, and I've been an avid scuba diver for over a decade. I've explored reefs in the Caribbean, shipwrecks off the coast of North Carolina, and even dove under ice in the Arctic. But nothing in my years of experience could have prepared me for what I encountered in the Blue Hole cave system off the coast of Biswa. I'd heard whispers about the cave system for years, tales of vast, unexplored chambers, ancient Mayan artifacts, and strange rock formations that defied explanation. Most serious divers dismissed these stories as tall tales, exaggeration. Marine biologist, I decided to investigate for myself. I flew down to B's, rented some top-of-the-line diving gear, and hired a local guide named Carlos to take me out to the Blue Hole. "You sure about this, señorita?" Carlos asked as we approached the site. His weathered face creased with concern. "Many divers go into those caves. Not all come out." I brushed off his warning with a confident smile. "I've got over 500 dives under my belt, Carlos. I'll be fine." If only I'd listened to him. The dive started routinely enough. The Blue Hole itself was breathtaking, a perfect circle of deep blue in the middle of a coral atolls, like a pupil in a giant eye. As I descended into its depths, the water grew darker, cooler. Schools of tropical fish gave way to more unusual creatures: blind cavefish, translucent shrimp, bizarre isopods that looked like they belonged in a sci-fi movie. At about 120 feet down, I reached the entrance to the cave system. I paused there, double-checking my equipment. 2 full tanks of air, multiple lights, a safety line to find my way back. I was as prepared as I could be. With a deep breath, I swam into the cave. The first chamber was enormous, big enough to swallow a small office building. My powerful dive light barely reached the far walls. Stalactites hung from the ceiling like giant stone fangs, their tips disappearing into the murky water below. I spent nearly an hour exploring that first chamber, marveling at the alien beauty of this underwater world. But as fascinating as it wasn't what I had come for. I wanted to go deeper, to see things no other diver had seen before. That's when I found the narrow passage leading deeper into the cave system. It was barely wide enough for me to squeeze through with my tanks. Every instinct, honed by years of diving, screamed at me to turn back. Cave diving rule number 1, never enter a passage you can't easily turn around in. But the lure of the unknown was too strong. I told myself I'd just take a quick look, then come right back. I maneuvered through the tight passage, my light beam dancing over walls encrusted with strange, colorful mineral formations. The passage twisted and turned, leading me deeper into the heart of the underwater mountain. After what felt like an eternity of claustrophobic swimming, the passage opened up into another chamber. This one was smaller than the first, but somehow even more unsettling. The walls were smoother here, almost polished, and covered in strange, swirling patterns that didn't look natural. That's when I saw it. At first I thought it was just an unusual rock formation, a pale, vaguely humanoid shape in a far corner of the chamber. But as I swam closer, my blood ran cold. It wasn't a rock. The figure was clearly bipedal, with 2 arms and a head. But that's where any resemblance to a human ended. Skeletal frame, where eyes should have been there, were only dark sunken sockets. And its mouth. God! Its mouth was filled with row upon row of needle-sharp teeth. I recoiled in horror, my startled movement sending up a cloud of silt. For a moment the creature was obscured from view. When the water cleared, it was gone. Panic seized me. I spun around, my light jerking wildly across the chamber. Where had it gone? What was it? A movement caught my eye, something darting between 2 rock formations. I caught only a glimpse, but it was enough to send me racing back towards the narrow passage. I hit my head on the low ceiling in my haste, nearly knocking myself unconscious. Stars exploded in my vision, and I tasted blood where I'd bitten my lip. But fear drove me on. I scrambled through the passage, scraping my tanks against the rough walls behind me. I could hear something moving, something fast. I burst back into the large first chamber, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it over the rush of bubbles from my regulator. I whirled around, light searching frantically for any sign of pursuit. The beam caught something, a flash of pale flesh. Gone almost before I could register it. Then another, on the other side of the chamber, and another. With a jolt of terror, I realized there was more than one of these creatures. They were all around me. Moving with impossible speed through the water, I made a break for the cave entrance, pushing my body to its limits, but in my panic, I'd lost track of my position in the chamber. The exit should have been right there, but all I could see was solid rock. I was lost. My breathing was coming fast and shallow now, using up precious air. I forced myself to slow down to think. The safety line. I still had. The safety line attached to my belt. All I had to do was follow it back to the entrance. With shaking hands, I grabbed the line and began to follow it, but after only a few feet, I found the end. The line had been cut. A low gurgling sound echoed through the water, something between a growl and a laugh. They were toying with me. I don't know how long I swam, desperately searching for the way out. Time lost all meaning in that underwater labyrinth. My air supply dwindled dangerously low, the gauge moving into the red zone just when I was about to give up hope, to give in to the crushing despair and let the dark water take me. I saw it, a glimmer of lighter blue in the distance, the exit. I swam towards it with the last of my strength behind me. I could hear them getting closer, could almost feel their cold, clammy hands reaching for me. I burst out of the cave into open water, not daring to look back. I ascended as fast as I safely could, my lungs burning for air. When I finally broke the surface, I gulped in great lungfuls of air, tears mixing with the salt water on my face. Carlos's boat was there, and I've never been so glad to see anything in my life. "Señorita," Carlos cried as he helped me registered. "Bring me aboard." I was about to call for help. "You were down there for hours."
Hours, and it felt like days. As Carlos sped us back to shore, I huddled in the boat, shivering despite the tropical heat. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched, that those things were still down there, waiting. I tried to tell Carlos what I'd seen, but the words wouldn't come. How could I describe the horror I'd encountered? Who would believe me? I left Biz the next day, and haven't been diving since. Can't even bring myself to take a bath, showers only. Now I tell people I lost my passion for the sport, but the truth is, I'm terrified of what might be lurking beneath the surface of any body of water. Because now I know the truth. There are things down there, in the darkness. Ancient things, patient things. Things that have been waiting a long, long time for someone to stumble into their realm. And sometimes, if you go deep enough, if you push too far into places humans were never meant to go, you might just meet them. So, if you're a diver and you hear stories about unexplored cave systems, about strange creatures glimpsed in the depths, do yourself a favor. Stick to the well-mapped sites, the popular reefs, and well-lit waters, because in some caves, the true monsters aren't the ones you bring with you in your mind. They're the ones waiting in the darkness, with pale flesh and too many teeth, always hungry for unwary explorers to stumble into their domain.
And once they've got your scent, they never, ever stop hunting.
The moment the tractor sputtered to a halt in that secluded corner of the farm, I knew something was wrong. But it wasn't until I heard those inhuman shrieks echoing from the cornfield that I realized our annual fall festival had become a fight for survival. By then, half our hayride group had already vanished into the rows of corn, never to be seen again.
My name's Jake, and I've worked at Henderson's farm for the past 5 autumns. It's a decent seasonal gig helping with the harvest, running the pumpkin patch, and my personal favorite, driving the hayride tractor. Old Mr. Henderson's place is the biggest farm in the county, and their fall festival draws folks from all over the state. This year started like any other. The air was crisp, with the promise of winter leaves, turning gold and red on the trees, surrounding the sprawling fields. Families streamed in, kids squealing with delight as they picked pumpkins and navigated the corn maze. The scent of apple cider and cinnamon donuts wafted from the snack stand. It was the perfect autumn day. I was on hayride duty, piloting a tractor with a trailer full of hay bales and excited passengers. We did a big loop around the farm, past the pumpkin patches and apple orchards, before cutting through a section of the massive cornfield that covered the back half of the property. It was my last run of the day, the sun already dipping. Towards the horizon, I had a full load, maybe 20 people. A mix of families with young kids and a group of teenagers out for some fall fun. As we entered the cornfield, I launched into my usual spiel. "Now, folks, keep your eyes peeled," I said, raising my voice, to be heard over the tractor's rumble. "Legend has it, these fields are haunted by the ghost of old Farmer Mackenzie. They say on nights like this you can still hear him wandering the row, looking for his lost cow." The kids giggled nervously while the teens rolled their eyes. I grinned to myself. It was all part of the act. A bit of harmless fun to add some spice to the ride. We were about halfway through the cornfield when it happened. The tractor, old but reliable, suddenly sputtered and died. I frowned, trying to restart it, but the engine wouldn't turn over. "Hang on, folks," I called back to my passengers. "Looks like we're having some technical difficulties. Sit tight and I'll have us moving again in no time." I hopped down from the tractor, popping the hood to check the engine. Everything looked normal, but something felt off. The corn seemed to rustle, despite the lack of wind, and the fading sunlight cast long, ominous shadows between the rows. That's when I heard it, a sound that made my blood run cold. A shriek, high-pitched and decidedly inhuman, coming from deep within the cornfield. It was answered by another, then another, a chorus of unearthly cries that seemed to surround us. "What was that?" one of the teenagers asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Probably just some birds," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Nothing to worry about." But even as I said it, I knew it was a lie. No bird I'd ever heard made a sound like that. I turned back to the engine, desperately trying to get it started. Behind me, I could hear my passengers growing restless, their nervous chatter punctuated by those awful shrieks which seemed to be getting closer. "Hey, where's Tommy?" A woman's panicked voice cut through the noise. I spun around. A mother was standing up in the trailer, looking around frantically. "My son, he was right here a minute ago." A murmur of concern rippled through the group. People started looking around, calling out names, and that's when I realized the true horror of our situation. It wasn't just Tommy who was missing. Nearly half the people who had been on the trailer were gone, vanished without a trace. "Everyone stay calm," I said, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. "I'm sure they just wandered off to look at something. Let's all stick together." And my words were cut off by a scream. One of the teenagers was pointing at the cornfield, her face pale with terror. "There's something out there," she cried. I saw it move." I followed her gaze as squinting into the deepening shadows between the corn stalks. For a moment I saw nothing. Then, a flash of movement. Something pale and dactyry, twisted, darting between the rows with impossible speed. "Everyone off the trailer." I shouted, "We need to get out of here now." Panic set in. People scrambled off the hay bales, children crying, adults shouting. I tried to organize them into a group to lead them back the way we'd come, but it was chaos. And then they came. They burst from the corn in a nightmarish wave, creatures that defied description. Part plant, part animal, with elongated limbs and faces that were nothing but gaping mims filled with needle-sharp teeth. They moved with terrifying speed, snatching people and dragging them screaming into the corn. I grabbed a pitchfork from the trailer and swung it wildly, managing to fend off one of the creatures as it lunged for a young boy. "Run!" I yelled, shoving the kid towards the path. "Everyone run!" What followed was a nightmare I'll never forget. We ran through the cornfield, the creatures in pursuit, their shrieks filling the air. People fell behind, their screams abruptly cut off as they were taken. I led the dwindling group as best I could, but in the chaos and fading light, I quickly became disoriented. The corn seemed to move around us, the rows shifting and changing no matter which way we turned. We couldn't find the exit. It was as if the field itself was alive, conspiring with the creatures to keep us trapped. Night fell, plunging us into near total darkness. The only light came from the harvest moon rising above the corn, casting an eerie glow over the field. The attacks became more frequent, more frenzied. I swung my pitchfork again and again, feeling it connect with something solid, hearing inhuman screeches of pain. By the time we finally burst out of the cornfield, there were only 5 of us left. Me, 2 of the teenagers, and a couple with their young daughter. We ran towards the distant lights of the farm buildings, not daring to look back. We crashed into the festival area, gasping and wildy. The remaining visitors and staff stared at us, in shock. I tried to explain what had happened, to warn them, but my words came out as incoherent babbling. Old Mr. Henderson approached, his face grave. "They've come again, haven't they?" he said quietly. I stared at him, uncomprehending. You knew about this?" He nodded slowly. "It happens every few generations. The corn. It gets hungry. We try to keep people away from that part of the field, but sometimes..." He trailed off, shaking his head. I wanted to scream at him, to demand why he'd let us go into that field if he knew the danger, but I was too exhausted, too traumatized to do anything but collapsed to the ground. The authorities were called, of course. A massive search was launched, but they found nothing. No bodies, no evidence of any attack. The cornfield looked normal in the light of day, giving no hint of the horrors it had contained. Most people claimed it must have been some kind of putback, mass hallucination, or a prank gone wrong. The official report chalked it up to unexplained disappearances. And eventually the case went cold. But I know the truth.
I see it every time I close my eyes.
Those twisted creatures, the corn, moving with malevolent purpose, the faces of those I couldn't save.
I don't work at Henderson's farm anymore. Can't stand the sight of a cornfield these days.
But every autumn, when the air turns crisp and the leaves start to change, I remember, and I wonder, are they still out there waiting in the corn? Will they grow hungry again?
So if you're ever at a fall festival enjoying a hayride on a crisp autumn evening and your tractor breaks down in a lonely corner of a cornfield,
don't brush off that rustling as just the wind. Don't dismiss those strange CR as merely animal sounds. And whatever you do, don't wander into the corn. Because in some fields, the harvest isn't just about crops, and some hungers, once awakened, can never be satisfied.
the moment I first saw him lurking in the shadows of the subway platform, I knew something was terribly wrong. But it wasn't until I realized he was following my every move, always just at the edge of my vision, that I understood the true horror of my situation.
And as the minutes ticked by, my train still agonizingly far away, I began to wonder if I'd make it out of this station alive.
My name is Elena, and until that night, I was just another overworked graduate student in New York City. I'd stayed late at the university library, losing track of time, as I pored over research for my thesis.
By the time I packed up my laptop and headed for the subway, the city had transformed into its nocturnal self, a place of deep shadows and eerie quiet, punctuated by the occasional siren or drunken shout.
The 86th Street station was deserted. When I descended the stairs, my footsteps echoing off the grimy tiles. I'd taken this route hundreds of times before, but something felt different that night. The air seemed heavier, charged with an energy I couldn't explain.
I checked the arrival board, 20 minutes until the next downtown train. Great, I sighed, resigning myself to a long wait, and moved towards my usual spot on the platform.
That's when I saw him. He was standing at the far end of the platform, half hidden in the shadows cast by a flickering fluorescent light. Even from a distance, something about him set my teeth on edge. He was tall, unnaturally so, and rail-thin, his body swallowed up by a long, dark coat despite the summer heat. But it was his stillness that really unnerved me.
He didn't shift his weight, didn't check his phone, didn't do any of the 100 little movements people usually make while waiting. He just stood there, like a statue.
I told myself I was being paranoid. This was New York, after all. You see all types on the subway. I forced myself to look away, pulling out my phone to distract myself. A few minutes passed when I glanced up again, my heart nearly...
Still facing away from me. I hadn't heard him move, hadn't seen him in my peripheral vision. It was as if he had teleported. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. This was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. I looked around frantically for anyone else, but the platform remained empty, just me and him. I considered leaving, heading back up to the street to catch a cab, but something kept me rooted to the spot. Fear, maybe, or morbid curiosity, or perhaps some deeper instinct that told me running would only make things worse, so I stayed. My eyes locked on the strange figure, and that's when he turned his head, slowly, so slowly, to look at me. I wish I could say I saw something monstrous, that he had glowing eyes or fangs or something that would justify the terror coursing through me, but the truth was almost worse. His face was blank, expressionless, like a mannequin given horrible life. Our eyes met, or at least I think they did. It was hard to tell given the distance and the poor lighting, but in that moment I felt seen, not just observed, but seen, in a way that left me feeling exposed, vulnerable. I looked away quickly, my heart pounding. When I gathered the courage to look back, he had moved again, closer now, still facing away from me, but only a few yards down the platform. Panic rose in my throat. I backed away, moving towards the stairs, but as I did, he moved too, matching my pace exactly, always keeping the same distance between us, always staying just in my peripheral vision. This continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Me inching towards the exit, him mirroring my movements with uncanny precision. The whole time that oppressive silence hung over the station, broken only by the distant rumble of trains on other lines. I reached the base of the stairs and paused, one foot on the bottom step. Part of me screamed to run, to flee back to the relative safety of the street above, but another part, a deeper, more primal part, warned that turning my back on this thing would be a fatal mistake. So I stood there, frozen and indecision, watching as the figure slowly, so slowly, began to turn towards me. That's when I heard it. The blessed sound of an approaching train, my train. Relief flooded through me, followed quickly by a new wave of terror, because I knew with a certainty I couldn't explain that I had to be on that train, that if I missed it, I would never leave this platform. The next few moments were a blur. I ran towards the edge of the platform, no longer caring if I turned my back on the stranger. I could feel him behind me, moving with that same unnatural speed and silence. The train burst into the station in a rush of wind and screeching metal. I positioned myself in front of where I knew the doors would open, bouncing on the balls of my feet in anticipation. As the train slowed to a stop, I risked a glance over my shoulder. The man was there, much closer now, his arm outstretched. His fingers were too long, joints bent at impossible angles. The doors slid open. I threw myself inside, stumbling into an empty car. As I whirled around, I caught one last glimpse of the platform and the figure standing at the very edge. His blank face turned towards me. Then the doors closed, and the train pulled away, leaving the strange man and that nightmarish platform behind. I sank into a seat, my legs shaking too badly to stand. As the adrenaline faded, I tried to make sense of what had just happened. Had I imagined it all? Was I so exhausted from studying that my mind had conjured up some bizarre hallucination? But deep down I knew it had been real. The terror I felt was too visceral, too raw to have been a product of my imagination. When I finally reached my stop, I half expected to see the strange man waiting on the platform, but it was just the usual late-night crowd. A few tired workers, some tipsy revelers heading home from bars. I made it back to my apartment in record time, double-checking every lock before collapsing into bed. Sleep was a long time coming, and when it did, it was filled with dreams of endless subway platforms and silent eyes pursuing figures. The next day I told myself it had all been a stress-induced fantasy. I went about my routine as normal, pushing the memories of the previous night to the back of my mind. But as evening fell and I faced the prospect of another late night at the library, I found myself making excuses to stay home. A week. Then 2. I took cabs or buses, anything to avoid the subway. My friends noticed my newfound aversion to public transportation, but I brushed off their concerns with vague excuses about wanting more exercise. But I couldn't avoid it forever. One night, running late for a crucial meeting, I found myself with no choice but to take the subway. As I descended the stairs to the 886th Street station, my palms were slick with sweat. The platform looked normal. Crowds of commuters, the usual bustle of a New York evening. I began to relax, feeling foolish for my fears. And then I saw him. He was at the far end of the platform, half hidden behind a pillar. That same unnaturally tall, thin figure. That same blank face turned in my direction. Our eyes met across the crowded platform. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't over. Maybe it would never be over. I turned and fled, taking the stairs 2 at a time, not stopping until I was back on the street. I hailed the first cab I saw, my hands shaking as I gave the driver my address. As we pulled away from the curb, I glanced back at the subway entrance, and there he was, standing at the top of the stairs. watching my cab disappear into the New York traffic. I don't take the subway anymore. Can't bring myself to set foot in a glimpse of something in my peripheral vision. A tall, thin shape just at the edge of the shadows, and I wonder, did I ever really escape that night? Or is he still out there, waiting, following, always, just out of sight? So if you're ever in a subway station late at night and you see a strange figure lurking in the shadows, don't dismiss it. Don't try to rationalize it away. And whatever you do, don't let it get between you and the exit, because some predators don't just stalk their prey in the wild. Some hunt in the tunnels and platforms beneath our feet. Patient and persistent, always watching, always waiting for their moment to strike. And once they've chosen you, they never, ever stop hunting. The moment the stranger emerged from the ocean, I knew something was terribly wrong. His eyes were wild, his clothes tattered, and his story defied belief. But as night fell and those things began to circle our bonfire, I realized that our beach party had become a desperate fight for survival. My name's Alex, and I was just looking for a good time with friends on a warm summer night. It was the last weekend before our senior year of college, and the group of us had decided to throw a beach bonfire party to celebrate. We'd found a secluded spot, about an hour's drive from campus, far from the more popular beaches, the perfect place to let loose without worrying about noise complaints or campus security. As the sun began to set, casting a warm, golden glow across the water, we got the fire going. The crackling flames, the sound of waves lapping at the shore, the laughter of friends. It was idyllic. Someone broke out a guitar, and soon we were all singing along, badly, but enthusiastically, to every cheesy pop song we could think of. I was in the middle of an impassioned rendition of Don't Stop Believing when I saw him. A figure stumbling out of the surf. At first I thought it was one of our group, maybe someone who'd gone for a late swim. But as he drew closer, I realized I didn't recognize him. The singing trailed off as others noticed the newcomer. He was a man, probably in his mid-30s, with wild matted hair and a scraggly beard. His clothes were soaked and torn, hanging off his thin frame. But it was his eyes that really caught my attention, wide and frantic, darting around as if expecting an attack at any moment. "Hey man, you okay?" my friend Jake called out, always the first to offer help. The stranger's head snapped towards us, and for a moment I thought he might bolt back into the ocean. But then he stumbled forward, collapsing onto the sand near our fire. "Thank God," he gasped, his voice raspy as if from disuse. I thought I'd never see people again. We gathered around him, someone offering a blanket, another a bottle of water. He gulped it down greedily, water spilling down his chin. "What happened to you?" I asked, curiosity overcoming my initial weariness. "Were you on a boat that sank or something?" He shook his head vehemently. No boat. I was taken." A nervous chuckle ran through our group. "Taken?" Jake asked. "What, like abducted by aliens or something?" The man's eyes locked onto Jake, and the intensity in them made me take a step back. "Not aliens," he said. "Something worse. Something from the deep." And then he started to talk. He told us a story so fantastic, so terrifying that at first we were sure it was some elaborate prank. He claimed to have been a marine biologist on an expedition to study deep-sea life in the Caribbean. Their ship had been state-of-the-art, equipped with the latest in submersible technology, but on their third dive, something had gone wrong. Their submersible had been attacked by something massive with tentacles that could crush steel like it was tin foil. The sub had been dragged down into the inky blackness of the deep ocean. He described waking up in some kind of underwater city, a vast complex of stone buildings that looked ancient yet somehow still functional, and the inhabitants. He struggled to describe them, humanoid but wrong, fish-like features, scales instead of skin, webbed hands with razor-sharp claws. They kept us alive, he said, his voice shaking. Studied us, experimented on us. I saw them change people, turn them into things like them. He claimed to have escaped during some kind of undersea earthquake, managing to find an air pocket and eventually making his way to the surface. He'd been adrift for days before washing up on our beach as his story came to an end. A heavy silence fell over our group. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the gentle lapping of waves on the shore. That's quite a story, I said, finally trying to keep my voice neutral. Part of me wanted to laugh it off, to dismiss it as the ravings of a man who'd clearly been through some kind of trauma. But there was something in his eyes, a haunted look that made me hesitate. You don't believe me? He said. It wasn't a question. I wouldn't believe me either. But they're real, and they're coming. They've been down there for thousands of years, watching us, waiting. And now they're ready to reclaim the surface. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cooling night air. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, a scream cut through the night. We all whirled around. Megan, who'd wandered a little way down the beach, was backing away from the water's edge, pointing with a shaking hand. "There's something out there," she cried. I saw eyes." We rushed to her side, peering out into the darkness. For a moment I saw nothing. Then a flash of movement, something breaking the surface of the water. Just for an instant, something that looked disturbingly like a human arm but elongated, ending in wickedly curved claws. "No," the stranger whispered behind us. "They found me. They found us." Panic set in. We scrambled back towards our bonfire, huddling together as we scanned the water. More shapes were visible now, dark forms moving just beneath the surface, circling our position. "We need to get out of here," Jake said, his usual bravado replaced by naked fear. "We need to get to the cars." But our vehicles were parked up a narrow path that led through a stretch of dense woods to reach them. We'd have to turn our backs on the ocean and whatever was lurking out there. Before we could decide on a course of action, it happened. With a sound like a wet towel being torn in half, something burst from the water. In the flickering firelight, I caught a glimpse of glistening scales, bulbous eyes, a mouth filled with needle-sharp teeth. Screams erupted from our group. We scattered, some running for the woods, others frozen in terror. I stumbled backwards, tripping over a piece of driftwood and falling hard onto the sand. As I scrambled to my feet, I saw more of them emerging from the surf. They moved with a horrible fluidity, part crawl, part slither. Their bodies were vaguely humanoid, but twisted, elongated in ways that defied anatomy. One of them grabbed Megan as she tried to run. I watched in horror as it dragged her towards the water, her screams cutting off abruptly as she was pulled under. "The fire," the stranger yelled, snapping me out of my daze. "They hate the fire. It's your only chance." I didn't stop to question him. I grabbed a burning branch from the bonfire, wielding it like a torch. The nearest creature hissed and recoiled, its flesh sizzling where sparks landed on it. "Everyone grab something burning," I shouted. "Form a circle." Those of us who remained did as I said, creating a ring of fire around us. The creatures prowled just outside the circle of light, their inhuman eyes reflecting the flames. For what felt like hours, we stood our ground, waving our makeshift torches at any creature that dared to get too close. I lost track of how many of our group were taken. Every time I heard a scream cut short, every splash that signaled another person dragged into the depths, I felt a piece of my sanity slip away as the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn. The attacks grew less frequent by the time the sun peeked over the horizon. The beach was empty save for our small, shell-shocked group. We made our way to the cars in silence, no one daring to speak about what we'd witnessed. The stranger was gone, vanished at some point during the night. Part of me wondered if he'd ever really been there at all. In the days that followed, we tried to report what had happened, but with no bodies, no evidence beyond our wild stories, we were dismissed as drunk college kids playing a prank. The official report chalked it up to a few of our friends drowning in a tragic accident. But I know the truth. I see it every time I close my eyes. Those twisted forms emerging from the waves. Those hungry, inhuman eyes. I haven't set foot on a beach since that night. Can't even look at the ocean without feeling a wave of panic. Because I know they're out there, waiting, watching. And one day, they'll come for us all. So if you're ever on a beach late at night, and you see something strange in the water, don't dismiss it. Don't try to rationalize it away. And whatever you do, don't go near the waves. Because some things are better left in the depths. And once they've gotten a taste of the surface, they'll never stop hunting for more. The moment I saw that suspicious van parked near the playground, I felt a chill run down my spine. But it wasn't until my son whispered about his special friend that I realized we were living a parent's worst nightmare. By the time I noticed he was missing, those crucial, heart-stopping minutes had already ticked by, and I knew our lives would never be the same. My name is Sarah, and until last month, I was just another overworked single mom trying to balance a career with raising my 6-year-old son, Tommy. Our neighborhood park had always been our sanctuary, a place where Tommy could burn off energy while I caught up on emails or simply enjoyed a few moments of peace. It was a warm Saturday afternoon when everything changed. Tommy was eager to get to the park, practically dragging me out the door, with excited chatter about the new climbing structure they'd installed. As we walked the familiar route, I noticed something out of place. A nondescript white van parked across the street from the playground. It wasn't unusual to see unfamiliar vehicles in the area, but something about this one set my teeth on edge. I tried to shake off the feeling as we entered the park. Tommy made a beeline for the swings, his favorite, while I settled onto a nearby bench. I kept one eye on him as I scrolled through my phone, half listening to his delighted squeals as he pumped his legs trying to go higher and higher. After a while, Tommy abandoned the swings for the sandbox. I watched as he approached another little boy, the two of them quickly engrossed in building an elaborate sandcastle. Satisfied that he was happily occupied, I turned my attention back to my phone, responding to a few work emails. It wasn't until about 20 minutes later that I realized Tommy had gone quiet. I looked up, scanning the playground for his familiar mop of brown hair. He wasn't in the sandbox anymore, nor on any of the play structures. A twinge of panic fluttered in my chest. "Tommy!" I called out, getting to my feet. No response. I circled the playground, my heart rate increasing with each program. Step he wasn't on the slides, wasn't in the tube tunnel where he sometimes liked to hide. Other parents were starting to notice my distress, asking if they could help. That's when I remembered the van. My blood ran cold as I sprinted to the street, praying I was overreacting, but the van was gone. What followed was a blur of panic and frantic activity. I called the police, my voice shaking as I tried to describe Tommy and the van. Officers arrived, cordoning off the area and questioning everyone present. I answered their questions on autopilot, my mind unable to process the reality of what was happening. Hours passed in an agonizing haze as darkness fell. The initial flurry of activity gave way to a terrible waiting game. I sat on our living room couch, surrounded by well-meaning friends and neighbors, barely registering their words of comfort. My eyes were glued to the front door, willing it to open, for Tommy to walk through with a sheepish grin, explaining it had all been a silly game of hide and seek. But he didn't come home that night, or the next, or the one after that. The days that followed were a nightmare of police interviews, press conferences, and sleepless nights. I replayed every moment of that afternoon in my mind, torturing myself with what-ifs. What if I'd been paying closer attention? What if we'd left the park 5 minutes earlier? What if I'd trusted my instincts about that van? It was during one of the police interviews that a detective asked a question that made my blood run cold. "Mrs. Johnson, had Tommy mentioned any new friends recently? Anyone he seemed particularly excited about? I started to shake my head, then froze as a memory surfaced. A few days before the incident, Tommy had been unusually quiet on our walk home from school. When I asked what was wrong, he'd hesitated before saying, "Mommy, can I tell you a secret?" I'd encouraged him, of course, always eager to be his confidant. "I have a special friend," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But it's a secret," he said. "I can't tell anyone about him." At the time, I'd assumed he was talking about an imaginary friend. It wasn't unusual for kids his age to have them, and I hadn't wanted to discourage his creativity. I'd simply smiled and told him it was okay to have secrets as long as they weren't secrets that made him feel bad or scared. Now, recalling that conversation, I felt physically ill. How could I have been so blind? The detective's face tightened as I relayed this information. "Why didn't you mention this before?" he asked, his tone more weary than accusatory. I couldn't answer. The guilt was overwhelming, choking me with its intensity. The investigation took on a new urgency after that revelation. They combed through security footage from nearby businesses, interviewed Tommy's teachers and our neighbors, and put out a nationwide alert for the van. Days turned into weeks. Tommy's face was plastered on every local news channel, his missing person posters taped to telephone poles and shop windows. I took a leave of absence from work, unable to focus on anything but the search for my son. Then, exactly 1 month after Tommy disappeared, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. With trembling hands, I answered. "Mrs. Johnson," a gruff voice said, "this is Detective Ramirez. We need you to come down to the station right away." My heart leapt into my throat. "Did you find him? Is Tommy okay?" There was a pause that seemed to stretch for an eternity. "Just come down to the station, Mrs. Johnson, as quickly as you can." The drive to the police station was the longest of my life. My mind raced through every possibility, from the joyous reunion I'd been praying for to the devastating news I couldn't bear to contemplate. As I was led into an interview room, I noticed an unusual flurry of activity in the station. Detective Ramirez was waiting for me, his face a mask of professional detachment. "Mrs. Johnson," he began, "about an hour ago we received a 911 call from a gas station attendant in a town about 200 miles north of here. He reported a young boy wandering alone in the parking lot, matching Tommy's description." I gasped, tears springing to my eyes. "Is it him? Is he okay?" The detective held up a hand. "We believe it is Tommy, yes. Local police picked him up and are bringing him here as we speak, but Mrs. Johnson, I need to prepare you. Tommy appears to be physically unharmed, but he's not speaking. We don't know yet what he's been through, what he might have witnessed. It's going to be a long road." I barely heard the rest of what he said. My son was alive. He was coming home. Nothing else mattered. The reunion, when it finally happened, was both joyous and heartbreaking. Tommy looked smaller somehow, his eyes wide and away in a way no child's eyes should be. When he saw me, he didn't run into my arms as I'd imagined. Instead, he approached cautiously, as if unsure of his welcome. I knelt down, opening my arms but not moving towards him, letting him set the pace. After a long moment, he stepped into my embrace. As I held him, feeling his small body tremble against mine, I made a silent bow. I would help him heal. I would do whatever it took to make him feel safe again. The months that followed were challenging beyond anything I could have imagined. Tommy remained largely nonverbal, communicating mainly through nods and headshakes. Nightmares plagued his sleep, and loud noises or sudden movements would send him into a panic. Slowly, with the help of therapists and child psychologists, we began to piece together what had happened. The special friend had been grooming Tommy for weeks, gaining his trust with small gifts and attention. On that fateful day in the park, he had convinced Tommy to go for a ride, promising to show him a magical place. The details of Tommy's month in captivity remained murky, locked away in his traumatized mind. The man who took him was eventually caught, but Tommy was unable to testify against him. It didn't matter. The evidence was overwhelming, and he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. It's been a year now since Tommy came home. He's speaking again, though he's still quieter than before. He's back in school making new friends, slowly reclaiming the childhood that was so violently interrupted.
As for me, I've become a fierce advocate for child safety, education, and tougher laws against predators. I can't change what happened to Tommy, but I can try to prevent it from happening to other children.
Every night, as I tuck Tommy into bed, I'm overwhelmed with gratitude that he's here, safe in his own room. But I'm also acutely aware of how quickly a normal day can turn into a nightmare. I know now that the monsters aren't just in stories. They're out there waiting for a moment of inattention, a child's innocence to exploit. So if you're a parent, hug your children a little tighter tonight. Talk to them about safety, about trusting their instincts. And if you ever see something that doesn't feel right, a van parked where it shouldn't be, a stranger paying too much attention to a child, don't hesitate to speak up. Because sometimes a parent watchful eye and a community's vigilance are all that stand between a child and unimaginable horror. And in those crucial moments, every second counts.
The moment I saw my child disappear into those playground tubes, I knew something was terribly wrong, but it wasn't until those heart-stopping minutes passed and he emerged, pale and trembling, refusing to speak about what had happened, that I realized our ordinary day at the park had become a waking nightmare. My name is Lisa, and I'm the mother of two energetic boys, 7-year-old Max and 5-year-old Ethan. Like most parents, I've had my share of scares, scraped knees, miter illnesses, the occasional tantrum in a public place, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened that sunny Tuesday afternoon at Oakwood Park. It was a day like any other. I picked the boys up from school, and since the weather was perfect, we decided to stop by the park before heading home. The playground was bustling with activity. Children's laughter filling the air as they climbed, swung, and then slid to their heart's content. Max immediately ran off to join Joe, a group of kids his age, on the monkey bars, while Ethan made a bean for his favorite part of the playground, a large twisting structure of connected tubes that kids could crawl through. I settled on a nearby bench, keeping one eye on the boys while I scrolled through emails on my phone. I glanced up every few minutes, watching as Ethan disappeared into one end of the tubes and emerged from another, giggling each time it was a game he never seemed tired of. After about 15 minutes, I noticed I hadn't seen him come out for a while. "Ethan?" I called out, not too worried at first. Sometimes he liked to sit in the tubes enjoying the cool shade they provided. No response.
Entrance bending down to appear inside. Ethan, the tube was empty. My heart rate quickened as I circled the structure, checking each exit. No sign of my little boy. I started calling his name, louder, my voice taking on an edge of panic that drew the attention of other parents. "Max," I shouted, spotting my older son still on the monkey bars. "Have you seen Ethan?" Max shook his head, looking confused and a little scared by my tone. The next few minutes were a blur of frantic searching. Other parents joined in, checking behind bushes, under benches, anywhere a small boy might hide. But Ethan was nowhere to be found. Just as I was about to call the police, a small voice called out, "Mommy!" I whirled around to see Ethan climbing out of one of the tubes. Relief flooded through me, so intense it made my knees weak. I rushed to him, scooping him up in my arms. "Oh my God, Ethan, where were you? I was so worried." But as I held him, I realized something was wrong. His little body was trembling, and when I pulled back to look at his face, His eyes were wide with an emotion I'd never seen in him before. Fear, shock. I couldn't quite place it. "Sweetie, what happened? Were you stuck in the tube?" Ethan shook his head slowly, his lower lip quivering. I can't tell," he whispered. "What do you mean you can't tell? Did something scare you in there?" He nodded, then buried his face in my shoulder, his small hands clutching my shirt tightly. I tried to question him further, but he refused to say anything more. By this point, a small crowd had gathered around us, murmuring in concern. I thanked them for their help, then quickly gathered Max and headed home, Ethan clinging to me the entire way. That night, Ethan had terrible nightmares. He woke up screaming something he hadn't done since he was a toddler. When I rushed to his room, he was sitting up in bed, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for some unseen threat. "It's okay, baby," I soothed, holding him close. "It was just a bad dream. You're safe now." But even as I said the words, a chill ran down my spine, because I knew deep down that whatever had happened in those tubes wasn't just a figment of his imagination. The next few days were tough. Ethan became clingy, refusing to let me out of his sight. He had more nightmares, and during the day he'd sometimes freeze up, staring off into space with that same wide-eyed, fearful expression I'd seen at the park. I tried everything I could think of to get him to open up. I asked gentle questions, tried play therapy techniques I'd read about online, even bribed him with his favorite treats. But every time I brought up what had happened in the tube, he'd clam up, sometimes even bursting into tears. After a week of this, I decided it was time to seek professional help. I made an appointment with a child psychiatrist. "Grave Miss Thompson," she began. "Ethan is exhibiting clear signs of post-traumatic stress. Whatever happened in those tubes, it was deeply frightening for him." "But what could have happened?" I asked, frustration and worry making my voice sharp. "He was only in there for a few minutes." Dr. Chen shook her head. "Time can be subjective, especially for children in high-stress situations. Ethan believes he was in those tubes for much longer than a few minutes." A cold feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. "What do you mean?" when I asked Ethan how long he was in the tubes. He said it felt like days. He talked about being in a dark place, hearing strange noises, feeling like he was somewhere else. I struggled to process this information. It didn't make sense. How could Ethan have experienced days in just a few minutes? Dr. Chen continued, her voice gentle. "Mrs. Thompson, I know this is difficult to hear, but I need to ask. Has Ethan ever shown signs of unusual experiences before? Seeing things that aren't there or claiming to visit strange places?" I shook my head vehemently. "No, never. He has a vivid imagination, sure, but nothing out of the ordinary for a 5-year-old. She nodded, making a note on her pad. "I'd like to see Ethan for regular sessions. We'll work on helping him process this experience and develop coping mechanisms for his anxiety." As we left the office, my mind was reeling. Part of me wanted to dismiss the whole thing as an overactive imagination, a childish fantasy gone wrong. But I couldn't shake the memory of Ethan's face when he emerged from those tubes, the raw fear in his eyes, the way his whole body had trembled. Over the next few weeks, Ethan slowly began to improve. The nightmares became less frequent, and he started to regain some of his usual cheerfulness. But he still refused to go near any enclosed play structures, and he'd often stop and stare at shadows with a wary expression. It was during our 3rd session with Dr. Chen that we finally got a break. Ethan had been drawing a technique the doctor used to help him express his feelings, when suddenly he dropped his crayon and looked up at me with tears in his eyes. "Mommy," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I saw the monster." My heart clenched. "What monster, sweetie?" He pointed at his drawing. It showed a crude depiction of the playground tubes, but inside was a mass of scribbled black crayon with glowing red eyes. "It was in the tubes," Ethan continued, his words coming out in a rush. "Now, when I crawled in, everything got dark, and then I was somewhere else. It was cold and scary, and I could hear things moving around. The monster tried to grab me, but I ran and ran until I found the way back." I exchanged a glance with Dr. Chen, who kept her expression carefully. "Neutral, Ethan," she said, gently. "This monster, was it something you'd seen before, maybe in a movie or a book?" Ethan shook his head, vigorously. "No, it was real, and I think it's still there, waiting." A shiver ran down my spine. I wanted to reassure him, to tell him there were no such things as monsters, but the conviction in his voice gave me pause. After the session, Dr. Chen pulled me aside. "Mrs. Thompson, I know this is hard to hear, but we need to consider the possibility that Ethan experienced something traumatic that his mind is interpreting through the lens of a child's imagination. The monster could be a way for him to process a frightening encounter with a real person." My blood ran cold at the implication. "You think someone hurt him in those tubes?" She held up a hand. "I'm not saying that's definitely what happened, but we need to be open to all possibilities. I'd like to recommend a physical exam, just to rule out any physical trauma." The next few days were a nightmare of doctor's visits, police interviews, and sleepless nights. To everyone's relief, the physical exam showed no signs of abuse. The police searched the playground thoroughly, but found nothing suspicious. In the end, we were left with more questions than answers. Ethan's story remained consistent. He insisted he had been transported to another place, a dark and frightening world, where a monster had tried to catch him. But how could that be possible? As the weeks passed, life slowly returned to normal. Ethan's nightmares became less frequent, and he even started asking to go to other playgrounds, though he still avoided tube structures. But sometimes I'd catch him staring at dark corners or closets with a wary expression, as if expecting something to emerge. And I found myself looking at the world differently too. I'd always considered myself a rational person, skeptical of supernatural claims, but Ethan's experience had shaken my certainty, because deep down, a part of me wondered, what if he was telling the truth? What if for a few brief minutes my little boy had slipped into somewhere else? I'll probably never know exactly what happened in those tubes that day, but one thing's for certain. I'll never look at a playground the same way again. And whenever I see a child crawl into one of those twisting tube structures, I can't help but hold my breath, silently willing them to emerge quickly, safely, unchanged, because sometimes the line between our world and something else might be thinner than we think. And in the innocent play structures of our everyday lives, there might be portals to places we can't begin to understand. So if your child ever freezes up at the playground or tells you a story that seems too fantastic to be true, listen, really listen, because in their wide eyes and trembling voices, there might be a glimpse of something beyond our ordinary understanding. Something that reminds us that the world is stranger and perhaps more dangerous than we ever imagined.